Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If Guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the 11th part of What If Issei Became the Ultimate Dragon. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Well, Scott, what do we think? Standing before a set of open, wrought iron gates, Issei Hyoudou looked at his school of the past year. It was built in the Western style, its ground floor windows tall and arched, the second through third simple squares, and with another line of windows protruding from the sloped, tiled roof. Done in shades of brown and cream, the whole thing was quietly peaceful. That was a large part of what gave it such a great reputation. Kyo Academy had, until only recently, been a girls-only school. However, with a change of management had come its co-ed status, and the Hyoudou family had immediately leapt on the chance for their son to attend a local high school of good repute. The Brunette hadn't complained. The place did have a good reputation, and good success figures too. Sure, his grades might not be the best ever, but he did well enough to get by, and from the articles he'd read online, this was the kind of school that could take that level of competence and accelerate it into the world of employment. Of course, it helps that there are so many girls around, doesn't it? The voice, baritone and smooth, was definitely tinged with wry amusement as it flowed through Issei's mind. The teen himself chuckled, turning a bit red as he scratched his cheek, brown eyes downcast momentarily. You know me too well, Scott. Of course I know you well, lad. We've been together forever. Red would know you this well too, but he wouldn't know what to do with a girl if one fell on him. Both human voices shared a chuckle, even as a third one, which sounded more like two mountains crashing into one another, let out a displeased breath that may have been called a hump for the progenitor human. What need have I to understand your race's mating habits? All your females are so scrawny, so fleshy. Even as he began moving forward again, satchel held over his shoulder and standard Kyo Academy uniform glowing slightly in the morning sun, Issei snorted. You're still moping over Tiamat dumping you? Huh. I am most certainly not. The Red Dragon Emperor roared, prompting his host to wince slightly, and a moan of pain from the elder male voice. I care not for that misleading wench. Yeah, you keep telling yourself that, Red, Scott muttered, glaring at the massive scaled creature from his place inside the boosted gear. Standing tall at 6.5 feet, the man himself was built like a brick outhouse. His hair was an orangey red mirrored by his close-cropped beard, and his almost inhumanly muscled torso was left bare, while his lower half was concealed to the knees by a wrap of tartan fabric. One incredibly large emerald eye fixed the human with a glare, which he just shrugged off. They'd been stuck together for 17 years. Even a dragon's irritation became somewhat diluted over time. But laddie, I'd say things'll be getting started this year. They've given us time to settle in, now's their time to start moving in. Issei, who by now had just about made it to his homeroom, grunted an affirmative. Yeah, I was thinking that too, he muttered under his breath. Not being able to communicate mentally with his tenants was a disadvantage he'd been forced to live with. Apparently, neither entity was privy to his thoughts. They could predict him based on their knowledge of him, but other communication was limited to the verbal on his part. Let them come. D-Drake dismissed. My partner is more than powerful enough to teach them their place. As the teacher walked in, the students rising to meet them, Scott watched pensively through his charge's eyes. I suppose he'll have to be. Oh, when recess rolled around, the one teen who was actually three beings wandered out into the sunlight, finding himself a spot to lay down on the grass. As he let the sun and wind wash over him, the Brunette sighed contentedly. I love summer. Hey, Issei, the young man in question groaned. Those two again. Opening his eyes, he found part of his field of vision obscured by two heads. One was shaved clean, revealing a mostly average face that held an oddly monk-like appearance that was incredibly deceiving. The other had a mop of darkish brown hair, and eyes that were concealed by a pair of glasses currently reflecting the sun's rays. These were Matsuda the perverted paparazzi and Madohama the three sizes scouter, also known as the perverted duo. And, somehow, the closest thing that Issei had to friends at this school. What are you doing lying around? Matsuda demanded, the former jock's face glowing with righteous purpose. It's summer, the first day back at school. Issei stared blankly back at him. The first meeting of the kendo club. Oh, that was it. Haven't I told you before? Issei groaned. I'm not interested in peeking on girls. Madohama chimed in, standing to his full height. But why? He cried, attracting attention from all over the quad. You're a virile young man, in the prime of your youth, surrounded by beautiful, bouncy, buxom women. It's your duty to appreciate them as much as possible. Issei just stared at him with a mix of pity and mild irritation. You really don't get it, he muttered, and a grunt of affirmation from Scott told him that the man agreed. D-Drake was just leaving them to it. The dragon cared little for this part of his life, leaving it to the teen's human tenant. Standing up himself, the rather well-built Brunette folded his arms and channeled just a hint of the draconic nature that D-Drake had gifted him with. My duty as a man, you say. The force of his glare and the mild pressure exerted by his aura seemed to shrink the two perverts, both of them stepping back as they found themselves the focus of Issei's irritation. Do not compare me to you, he continued, you who have forgotten the true nature of a man's duty. Setting his feet apart, the Brunette extended a fist to the sky as his voice rose and an infernal light seemed to shine from his eyes. I am a man, a defender of women everywhere, no matter their age or appearance. I am the elder brother, the helpful grandson, the gentleman who escorts his date home. He looked back down at the perverts, who seemed to have lost the facility to do anything but kneel before him and stare. To be a man is to understand the responsibility we have to care for women, to make them comfortable, to let them move in their own time, to come to us if they wish. He pointed one finger at the duo, and it might as well have been the judgment of God himself. That is my duty as a man, and if you cannot understand that, then you are not men. With that final proclamation, Issei allowed the power he'd been feeding to his aura to die away, prompting the two other teens to fall over backwards. Did I overdo it? The brunet muttered to himself, and two low chuckles echoed in his mind. No, partner, D-Drake told him. You chose the right amount of power. They simply have less of a defense against your aura than normal humans. Probably comes from being beaten down so often, Scott chimed in. The girls around here hit hard enough to bend even the human spirit, it would seem. Scratching the back of his head, Issei looked up and around. A large portion of the quad were staring at him. Some of the girls were blushing a little, others were glaring at him. Most of the men were glaring daggers at him, though a couple were nodding to themselves or at him. Tough crowd. Turning to leave, the self-proclaimed draconic gentleman paused for a moment when a slight tingle of energy ran over him. Looking back over his shoulder, his gaze focused on two figures standing on the roof of the academy. Both were female, and both were almost ridiculously busty for teenagers. The differences began there. The figure on the left had hair which flowed freely in the breeze, long enough for her to sit on if she tried, its color almost identical to the scales of D-Drake himself. Even from here, he could feel her teal eyes on him, almost glowing against the milk white of her skin. The girl on the right had hair as black as a crow's wing, kept in a long ponytail which swayed in the breeze. Her eyes were mostly closed, as per usual, but Issei knew a sliver of their amethyst could have been seen up close, set in porcelain features. The two great one-samas of Kyo Academy, Ria's Gremory and Akino Heimjima, lusted after by men and worshipped by women. And occasionally, vice versa. They were also both not human. Brown eyes met lightest blue for a long moment, despite the massive distance separating them, and then Issei offered a nod. He was a gentleman, after all. Acknowledgement offered, he turned and wandered off, hands in his pockets as he left two shivering perverts behind him. And by now, the kendo club will have finished changing. Nicely done, lad. Nicely done. From her position on the academy's roof, the red-haired teenager watched Issei disappear around the corner of a building. There was no mistake. It was incredibly faint, normally undetectable, but between now and a couple of other times in the past year. So Kaneko-chan was right. The young woman beside her, christened by the school as the Yamato Nechiko for her almost flawless appearance, had opened her eyes now, a twisted grin on her lips as light danced in amethyst. It looks like it, Rias confirmed, a smile pulling at her own lips. A dragon, right here in my reach. It must be fate. A low chuckle from beside her drew teal eyes to Ria's oldest friend, who was now supporting one of her cheeks with a hand. So little Rias has found her fated one already. So sudden. The Gremory quickly turned as red as her hair. Akino, oh, well, we know for sure now. Issei was talking, seemingly to himself, as he walked home from school. His satchel was carelessly slung over his shoulder while his other hand was in his jacket pocket. His face turned heavenwards even while his gaze darted to the path to ensure he didn't hit anyone. Two affirmative grunts. She was looking right at you, laddie, straight into your eyes. No 20/20 vision's gonna cut it at that kind of distance. She was also sensing us, D-Drake expanded. You might contain our power well, partner, but you used just enough back there to let her detect it. Likely, the same holds true for all the other scoldings you've given over the past year. The brunet sighed. Well, what am I supposed to do? Most of the school are misogynistic bastards. I can't just sit back and watch it happen. The emotional equivalent of a pat on the shoulder rolled in from Scott. And you don't have to, lad. Neither the Occult Research Club nor the Student Council have made a move just yet. If they wanted to harm you, they'd likely have done so already, before people knew you well enough to notice if you disappeared. They're watching, but they don't seem malign. They know about you, you know about them. We've not lost any advantage. D-Drake grunted. That isn't necessarily true. A dragon's power is highly distinctive, even in small amounts. They likely know what we are, but we can only guess. You covered this before, Issei recalled. The only major influences in Japan right now are the three factions and the yokai, right? That's right, partner. The angels, the fallen angels and the devils are still prevalent. The yokai keep to themselves though, and the majority never leave their hidden capital in Kyoto. So they're likely angels, devils, or fallen angels. The brunet sighed. So 2 chances out of 3 they're evil, huh? Man, that sucks. At that moment, the young man turned onto a bridge and found himself facing a girl around his age. Her hair was a glossy black and hung down to her mid-back. She had eyes of a dark violet, set in unblemished features with a healthy pink tinge to them. She was dressed in a maroon jacket over a white blouse, tied at the neck with a scarlet ribbon. A golden shield with a P on it was sewn over her heart, and the same color was applied to her jacket's buttons. A green skirt ended well above her knees, and white socks began just below the joint to lead into ordinary brown school shoes. All in all, she looked like a perfectly ordinary high school student, one either his age or perhaps a year below. but the aura of disquieting energy mixed with a sort of resigned malicious intent she was giving off kinda ruined the whole innocent schoolgirl act. Oh no, she was a great actress, he had to admit. She shuffled from foot to foot, poked her fingers together, her eyes flickered between the ground and his own eyes before turning bashfully away. She was even blushing. Why, you're Issei Hyoudou, right? Her voice was quiet, a bit shaky, and it held a tone that was resonating with his kawaii sense. That's me, he confirmed easily. It didn't particularly matter at this point. This creature had obviously looked somewhat into his background, but that wasn't a big deal. His parents were out of the country, as per usual, and trying to find them would probably be a nightmare. He had no siblings, and no real friends or valuable possessions. In other words, the most valuable information she could gain from that was his address and his school. Since one of those was trapped as best he could manage, and the other seemed like a den for other supernatural entities, he wasn't too worried about her making use of that information. Would you? More shuffling, more bashful glances. Then she clasped her hands together and leaned forward, face red as she rushed the words. Would you please go on a date with me? She even managed to give him a good window into her cleavage as she moved. This woman was good. Unfortunately for her, she was dealing with a gentleman, and one who knew far more than she was giving him credit for. Both Scott and Drake knew what he was thinking. All of them were well acquainted with the other's thought processes by now. Twin feelings of confirmation set their course. When it's such a beautiful girl as yourself asking me, he inquired, smiling just as he practiced in front of the mirror and stepping forward, extending one hand. How could I ever refuse? He gently took one of the woman's hands in his own, pressing a soft kiss to the back of it. You have me at a disadvantage, miss. You know I am Issei Hyoudou, but you have yet to give me your name. The woman seemed a touch nonplussed, but she recovered quickly and gave him a shy smile. I am Yuuma Mato. A beautiful name for a beautiful girl, the brunette mused. So Yuuma-chan, how about we meet in the town square on Friday afternoon? Don't worry about anything, I'll take care of the whole thing. Another smile, one which had managed to get him out of a lot of trouble over the years. It'll be a date to remember. Oh, a date to remember indeed, lad. It had been a pretty good day, all things considered. Though Yuuma had been a bit late, Issei had got himself a bit more evidence in his information war with his school's supernaturals when a woman who looked like a cosplayer handed him a pamphlet inscribed with a magic circle. According to Drake, the circle belonged to a devil. So, there were definitely devils in Kyo, and neither the orc or the council were fallen angels because the energy he'd managed to detect from them on rare occasions was vastly different from that of Yuuma. Thus, he was finally sure that he attended a high school with a decently high population of devils. Par for the course, really. The date had been fun. They'd been to a restaurant and the arcade, along with walking around and talking about various things. For a lot of it, Issei's date appeared to be lying through her teeth, but when the conversation ended up at the church, he'd been surprised. The anger she'd displayed for an instant, it hadn't been hatred, the ugly emotion he'd expect from a fallen angel. It had been a pure rage, a righteous anger that he himself had known several times. But that was a mystery for another time, because when they'd ended up in the park, the girl had revealed her true colors. It seemed that she'd actually gained a few inches in height, though that might just have been her posture changing. Her figure was still slight, a direct contradiction to her massive chest, and he could most definitely tell. Her legs up to mid-thigh and her arms up to mid-bicep were clad in leather boots and gloves respectively, with plated guards at her knees. Pauldrons extended from her shoulders, seemingly attached to the corset-like leather wrap just below her chest, supporting her bust. A strip of leather preserved her modesty there, seemingly attached to the choker around her neck by an arrangement of leather straps. Her ensemble was completed by a pair of bottoms that had less material than even a bikini, its material covering her absolute territory down and around to the curve of her rear, but not bothering with her cheeks at all. One half of its supporting arch was composed of 3 thin strips, while the other was a single, thicker band. It was modesty inverted, covering just about everything that could normally be left bare, and emphasizing what should be private. Yes, this was what he'd expect from a fallen angel, well, that and the 2 massive crow's wings sprouting from her back. I actually had fun today, the woman told him, a rush of power preceding the formation of a weapon in her hand. It was jagged, like a shard of broken glass that had been extended into a fair facsimile of a spear. It was almost the same color as her eyes, a darkened violet like twilight, and the young man was quite well assured that it was deadly. I didn't expect it, but you were a good date. For that, I'll tell you, my name is Rainier. Now go to your rest, cursing the god who placed a sacred gear within you. Then she threw, the air screaming around the point of the weapon that now sought Issei's heart. Instead, it met dirt as he sidestepped neatly. What? Rainier seemed honestly shocked, and he knew why. That attack was too fast for a normal human to see coming, let alone dodge. Boosted gear. There was a rush of crimson light around Issei's left arm, rising from his skin and rotating like a drill as he called for his weapon. It formed quickly, metal the color of fresh blood running up his limb to the elbow and taking shape. The fingers were talons, bladed and pointed to form deadly weapons. The back of the hand held a glowing emerald orb, currently radiating power and luminescence like a small sun. The metal leading up to his elbow was ridged, like overlapping scales, and extended out the sides like thorns. It terminated in an arrowhead shape that protruded a good few inches beyond his elbow, two golden spikes sweeping back to either side of it like horns. As it settled in place, Issei clenched his hand with the sound of metal on metal. "Drag, start the countdown." "Already done, partner." The brunet stared down his opponent, who was currently running through a train of thought. You knew, didn't you? Boost, that you were a fallen, that you planned to kill me." The young man grinned. "Yep, knew it from the start. Your intent was clear from the beginning, and you didn't even bother suppressing your power." The raven-haired woman recoiled, a hint of fear entering her gaze. "But why? Boost, a couple of reasons," the teen informed her. "One, you knew who I was and where I'd be. That means this was premeditated, and I'd like to know who wants me dead and why." He tilted his head sideways, though you seem to have answered that second part already. "The second reason is that I haven't gone on a date in ages, and I really wanted to get back in practice." That was depressingly true. Since Matsuda and Madohama had started clinging on him, girls tended to avoid him like the plague. It wasn't fair. He dedicated his life to the cause of the gentleman, and his unwilling association with two perverts ruined all his hard work. Still, a gentleman never rushed, never hurried, never pushed. They waited patiently, and if the women came to them, they accepted it as being worth the effort. Rainer's eye twitched, and Issei felt her power beginning to gather again. He took a stance, right foot back, fist drawn as if ready to punch. "And the third reason, boost, 16 times, explosion. I want to know what you're protecting." Rainer's features froze in shock. Her grip on her power fell apart along with her light spear, and she was completely unable to dodge as Issei's figure sprang forward like a bullet, his right hand glowing with red light as the heel of his palm rested gently on her collarbone. "Rushinchi no Jutsu, Amen." There was a flare of scarlet, a massive rush of built-up power running through the teen's hand and into the woman he was touching. The magic invaded her system, running along the conduits of her power and suffusing just about every inch of her. Then it contracted, wrapping softly around her mind and torso, imposing its wielders will on Rainer's body. A second later, her own magic was overwhelmed, and the fallen angel toppled over onto her target's shoulder as the power of a dragon willed her gently to sleep. Issei let out a breath as she fell, adjusting his stance to support her properly. Man, a gentleman shouldn't talk about a lady's weight, but good lord, how does she not have back pains? "She's a fallen angel, lad," Scott reminded him. "She's between 5 to 10 times as powerful as a human, even if she's basically a grunt. Her spine is more than capable of dealing with the strain." Right, not human," the brunet muttered to himself, grunting as he dismissed the boosted gear. A forward push of his shoulder set the woman to crumpling backwards, and he got an arm under her upper back. But still, these wings weigh a ton. Oh, from the tree line, a petite figure with white hair, cut in a bob and held in place by two black hair clips like a cat's face, watched with amber eyes as the teen she'd been assigned to watch hefted the fallen angel in his arms and started off toward the other side of the clearing. "But you needs to know about this." "Oh, so he beat her." Ria's Gremory sipped from the tea Akino had just brewed, sitting back in her wood and velvet chair as she contemplated the report Kaneko Taoju had just given her. They were in the Occult Research Club's meeting room, housed inside the old school building on the Kyo campus. It was shadowy and wood-paneled, lit by gas lamps in the Victorian style. That same style applied to most of the room. All the furniture was aged, wooden and cushioned with velvet. It was largely lined up against one wall, the other side of the room having been converted to serve as a bath. Engraved on the floor was a large, highly complex circle containing several geometric shapes, phrases in strange languages, and odd symbols. "Hi, Butchu." The red-haired devil set her tea down, caressing her temples with her fingers. And after he knocked her out, using some technique you didn't recognize in conjunction with the boosted gear, he then took her home with him. The white-haired girl nodded. From her standing position beside Ria's, Akino giggled. Ara, to think that a self-proclaimed gentleman would do such a thing. Across the room, a throat was cleared. "Actually, senpai, I don't think it's what you're thinking of." 3 pairs of eyes turned to Hyoudou Kiba, Kyo's prince, whose blonde locks and steel-gray eyes had combined with his known physicality and aristocratic features to earn him a female following within the school unmatched by any other. As a gentleman himself, he was the most likely to understand. A part of the gentleman's code is never leave a woman in distress. "Kaneko-chan, you said," he told her. He was curious. A nod from the petite girl. Then most likely, he decided that the best course of action was to take her to a place where he can question her while both their safeties are ensured. Ria's raised an eyebrow. "And he believes his home to be this place." The blonde swordsman shrugged. "Well, considering what happened when you tried to teleport in, Butchu." The redhead blushed a little at that. When she had become interested in the underclassman, she had attempted to infiltrate his home in order to gain a better understanding of him. Instead, she had found herself bouncing right off some kind of anti-teleportation barrier, and had discovered later that the phrase "it is polite to knock before entering" had appeared emblazoned across her forehead. It had vanished 24 hours later, but her peerage still liked to remind her of it. Alright, so his home is protected. She took another sip of tea. The question now is, what do we do about this? What the hell am I going to do about this? Issei was sitting in his kitchen, a cup of tea in hand as he conferred with his tenants. Rainer was asleep in a bed upstairs, currently surrounded by several magic circles. One would alert him when she woke, another would drain magic from the area around her and thereby stop her forming any light spears, while another would form an air-permeable barrier all over her like a second skin. It should be strong enough to prevent her moving from her position. Well, lad, I can't say I've got much experience with interrogations, Scott admitted. But if I was in your place, I'd suggest setting her at ease. You put her down with no issue, so she knows she can't beat you. If you can get her over her fear, then she might start to think well of you. Alright, that's one option, Issei muttered, at the same time knowing that he liked the sound of that one. It was the gentlemanly thing to do, after all. D-Drag, you have any thoughts on this? A chuckle like an avalanche rumbled. Diplomacy among dragons is very simple, partner. One demands, and the other either surrenders or fights. It's the same for everything: territory, food, treasure, mating. Right, I get the point. The Brunette told him quickly, steering his mind away from thoughts of the Red Dragon Emperor and mating. I had enough of that conversation after you and Tiamat's 700th anniversary. Issei and Scott shuddered as one. Apparently, D-Drag got talkative when he got melancholic, and being part of the same soul meant there was absolutely no way to tune him out. I don't think D-Drag's approach will work, Issei sighed. I've beaten her once already, and using that fear to get what I want is just ungentlemanly. The dragon grumbled, but relented. He knew his host had some odd ideas about interacting with the females of his species, largely brought about by the large human that had shared the boosted gears cityscape ever since the child's birth. So, we do this our way then, lad. The Brunette grinned. Yep, we do what we were born to do, charm a beautiful woman. Oh, when Rainer woke, the first thing she noticed was that she was still alive. That was both good and bad. Good, because she didn't particularly want to die. Bad, because there were some things in life far worse than death. She opened her eyes, trying to look around. However, she found that she couldn't turn her head. Attempts to move other parts of her body met with equal failure, and she felt a rising panic as the possible implications of her paralysis set in. Ah, you're awake then. Good morning. The sudden voice would have caused her to jump if she could. Instead, her eyes immediately shot in the direction of the sound. Standing within her field of view, but out of arm's reach, was the Brunette she'd tried to kill. He was smiling at her, an honest expression of joy, and he appeared to be carrying a tray. Her imagination kicked into overdrive, wondering what could possibly be on it. Drugs to make her talk. Torture implements. I brought breakfast. I'm afraid I don't know what you like, so I made do with something Western. Apparently, the tray held sausages, beans, eggs, and several slices of toast. A mug of tea steamed beside it where the metal service platter was set down somewhere beside her. Ah, you can't move your head, can you? Sorry about that, let me just. There was a rustle of cloth, a brief whisper of the same power that had overcome her the previous night, and she found that she could move her head. There we go, that ought to do it. She immediately began scanning the room with her wider range of vision. It was fairly standard. The walls were a light blue, unadorned save for a window which showed a morning sun and an open door leading into a hallway. There was a wardrobe standing in a corner, and she appeared to be lying on a fairly standard double bed. You're in my house, the Brunette informed her. One of the guest rooms. You slept through the night, though I have to say that I thought I'd have to find a hammock or something until your wings folded themselves away. Ah, that was right. Her wings had retracted ... but if they disappeared, then. Apparently knowing what she was thinking, Issei turned a bit red. Yeah, I hadn't realized that your outfit wasn't ... well, you know, real. While the whole magical clothes thing is kinda cool, it seems a bit impractical if it falls apart overnight. He gestured to the sheets covering her. I'm afraid I don't have any female clothing around besides the stuff my mum left, and she's not as ... well, she has different sizes. So, I guess I can only apologize. The raven-haired fallen stared at the team beside her for a long moment, before speaking slowly. It's ... fine ... it was hardly the first time someone had seen her naked. Indeed, it was far from the first night she'd spent unclothed in someone else's bed. But all the same, waking up naked after being defeated in battle was rather unsettling. Why? She coughed, and brown eyes widened slightly. Damn, I actually forgot, didn't I? Breakfast first, talk later. Issei reached up to seemingly empty air, and a glowing red magic circle manifested there. His fingers danced over it, switching out symbols, replacing phrases, rearranging the shapes. After about 20 seconds, he stopped, letting the circle disappear. Right, you should be able to sit up now and move your arms. You can't move beyond the bed yet, but apart from that you should be fine. Cautiously, the fallen angel started moving. One hand was moved to hold the bedsheets in place, while the other helped push her into an upright sitting position. The Brunette, watching her, frowned. You can't eat breakfast with only one hand. He thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers. Right, give me a minute. With that, he left the room. Sitting on the bed, Rainer leaned back against the headboard and tried to understand what was going on. She thought she had successfully found her way inside the teen's guard, knowing that he possessed a powerful sacred gear of some kind. She'd gone through the motions on the date, though she had to admit, at some point she'd come to enjoy it. The pleasant conversation, the lack of lustful glances, the genuine kindness he'd shown her. It had all been nice. Then had come the evening in the park, and she'd put herself in the frame of mind to do what she needed to. She released her transformation ... and looking back, that's where it had gone wrong. He hadn't been scared, hadn't been surprised, hadn't even blinked as her wings unfurled and she summoned her battle outfit. She should have known, but all her focus was on getting through the act without backing out. She had to kill him, there was no other choice. And she'd thrown her spear ... only for him to dodge it easily, as if he'd known it was coming for minutes beforehand. What were the reasons he had given her? He wanted to know the reason behind her attempt, the person who ordered it. The raven-haired woman's eye twitched again. Apparently he had really wanted a date, enough to take out a murderous fallen angel, even. Just what the hell kind of man was he? But he'd had one more reason. What she was protecting. Telling him would be a risk, a massive risk. So far, the Emperor seemed benevolent, she was unharmed, her restraints were no more invasive than necessary, and her modesty had been protected ... for the most part. But there was always the chance that it was an act, that he was waiting to show his true colors. But if he wasn't, if he was a good person, as he appeared to be, then, just maybe. Found it. She jerked her head to the doorway as the teen entered, grinning and carrying a garment of some kind. It's my old man's dressing gown. It's the biggest thing we've got around here. I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to close mine or my mum's, so. He shrugged. What you gonna do? Brown eyes closed for a moment, then both his hands began to glow a dull crimson. Rainier tensed, but Issei simply passed the dressing gown through the suddenly visible curve of the barrier with a few sparks of energy, placing it on the bed before following it with the breakfast tray. Right, he gestured to the food and clothing. Get that on, and get some food in you. I'll be back in about 15 minutes, once I've cleaned up downstairs. At that point, we'll talk, okay? Not waiting for her to say anything, he tossed a wave over his shoulder and left the room, pulling the door closed. There was no click of an extra lock, no wave of power to indicate an alarm spell or similar. It was to give her privacy, rather than to constrain her further. The fallen stared at the now-closed door for a long moment, before looking down to the cotton garment and the steaming food set across her knees. Well, odds were he didn't wait this long just to poison her. 15 minutes later, true to his word, Issei knocked on the bedroom door. Rainier, he called. Can I come in? There was a moment of silence, before a mostly collected female voice called back. Yes. Pushing open the portal, he crossed to the seat beside the bed, settling down so that his head was level with his guest's. She had donned the dressing gown, and the brunet found himself thankful that his old man was built so similarly to Scott. If he'd been any thinner, she would never have been able to wear it. How was breakfast? He asked, trying to keep things light. He wanted her to feel at ease, after all, not pressured. The fallen's cheeks took on a rosy hue, and she looked to the tray on her lap. It had been picked clean, nothing remained but some traces of egg yolk and the tomato sauce from the beans. It was ... good. She finally told him, and he took her compliment as a good sign, of both his cooking and of her comfort level. I'm glad to hear it. He smiled at her, before rubbing his hands together. Now, we can talk. Rainier tensed up immediately, her eyes darting back and forth while her arms raised slightly in defense. Right, not that comfortable yet. Issei chuckled, hoping to diffuse her anxiety with good humor. Don't worry, I'd just like the answers to a couple of questions, and we'll decide what's going to happen afterwards. Dark amethyst eyes appraised him, scrutinizing his features for deceit they would not find. What questions? Ah, that was a good sign. She was willing to consider answering him. Well, it's not much, he told her. I already know my sacred gear is why you were going to kill me, but from how reluctant you seemed, it probably wasn't your idea. So, I was just wondering, who set you on me? The woman stared at him for a long moment, then down to her lap, where her fingers started playing with one another. No one ordered me to kill you, I acted on my own. She glanced up at him again. I didn't really want to, but I was going to anyway. Interesting. I believe she is being truthful. D-Drake's tone was curious, and his comment was supported by a grunt from Scott. That's interesting. Issei echoed, tapping his chin. And I bet that the answer to my other question will tell me why. The fallen tensed up again, obviously aware of what he was going to ask next. Tell me, Rainier, you fallen angel who was willing to push through with a murder you didn't wish to commit, what was your reason? What did you wish to protect so badly? The woman shifted uncomfortably on the bed, and Issei leaned back in his chair to make sure she had enough space. He remained quiet, letting her decide whether or not she wanted to talk to him about this. For a creature of sin, he'd found her to be quite reasonable, and apparently she had at least some qualms with murder that told him she wasn't a lost cause. She was a woman in distress, and it was his job to look after her if she'd let him. There's a girl, she spoke finally, her gaze burning into his own as she looked for any sign of malice or ill intent. A former nun, by the name of Asia Argento. The church excommunicated her, and my superior recruited her. She's coming here, soon. Rainier took a deep, shuddering breath. She's an innocent. She was kicked out for healing a devil she didn't know was a devil, despite not having a single other sin to her name, despite being hailed for years as a holy maiden and a miracle healer. The woman clenched her fists. When she arrived, we were to carry out a ritual on the next full moon and extract her sacred gear so that his faction can make use of its power. The way she spat the word Issei didn't need his ability to read people to understand that Rainer had a deep-seated, soul-rooted hatred of him. It would kill her, she whispered. That bastard wanted me to kill an innocent girl just so he could get his hands on her power. She looked down at her hands. I thought, if I could get you instead, bring you to the edge of death and hold you there until the day I could placate him. Maybe I could at least buy more time for her ... so I could plan to get her away. Her head hung low, face shrouded by raven hair. The fallen let her hands relax and fall to the covers. That's it. I couldn't bear the thought of killing that girl, so I was going to kill you in her place. There was silence in the bedroom. Issei sat back, fingers steepled, thinking and muttering under his breath as he conversed with his tenants. On the bed, Rainer simply waited for judgment to be passed. This was an incredible risk she was taking, but this was the current generation's Red Dragon Emperor, he who possessed the soul of the great Welsh dragon in the form of the boosted gear, one of the 13 Longinus which had the potential to slay a god. If anyone could stand up to ... that man, it would be this person. She could only hope he truly was the person he appeared to be, or otherwise she had likely just damned herself and Asia both. Finally, after several minutes, the brunet stopped sub-vocalizing and refocused his attention on the fallen angel Rainer, he began, and she felt compelled to listen. You willingly, and in full knowledge of your actions, planned and attempted to execute the deception and murder of a 17-year-old unaware of the supernatural world. This is a fact that cannot be ignored. Her hands clenching again, the woman started cursing herself for ever thinking that telling him the truth was a good idea. She should have known, should never have placed her trust in someone like this. However, her head shot back up, her gaze meeting Brown. They were somber, but there was a glint of something there that may well have been humor, or was it, perhaps, compassion. Your reasons for doing so were pure and true, worthy of any true angel. You acted in defense of an innocent, at great personal risk to yourself. This also cannot be ignored. Issei stood up. In a just world, these facts would balance one another. Just as her rising hopes seemed fit to burn, Rainer saw the roguish grin on her host's face. Fortunately for you, this is not a just world, and I'm about as biased as they come. The magic circle flared into life again, and Issei pressed his left hand to its surface. There was another flash, and then the various lines and symbols which composed scattered across the air like shattered glass. Briefly, a scarlet dome shimmered into view around the bed, formed of countless interlocking characters. Then, it dimmed and vanished, its quiet hum of power disappearing too. A touch shakily, Rainer looked to the brunet beside her, who was extending a hand to her. Slowly, carefully, she placed her own hand in his, and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Pressing down on his arm, she rose too. Without her boots, she found she was actually about an inch shorter than him. Shall we start over? He took the hand that he was holding, pressing his lips gently to its back. I'm Issei Hyoudou, the Red Dragon Emperor. Staring back at him for a long moment, a hopeful and delicate smile spread across the fallen angel's face. I'm Rainer, former guardian angel. A genuine smile made its way across Issei's features. It's good to meet you, Rainer. I think this is going to be the start of something great. His eyes took on a determined shine. Now, tell me about this girl who needs protecting. Oh, so it's decided. Riaz nodded, looking out the window of her club room, Akino standing behind her. Yes, I'll approach him. The dark-haired girl behind her frowned slightly. And if he isn't receptive to your advances? The red-headed devil pressed her fingers to the cool glass before her, a familiar set of troubled features looking back at her from the crystalline surface. Then, I suppose my last chance will be gone. A supportive hand landed on her shoulder, and the young woman held it tight. She just had to hope that he'd be willing to listen to her. Otherwise ... the results didn't bear thinking about. Issei Hyoudou, please, be the kind of person you seem to be. Compendium. One sama, a respectful term for an older sister. Yaokai, catch-all term for native Japanese supernatural species, ranging from Nekomata to Kitsune and everything in between. Largely humanoid with animal traits, or vice versa. Ano, similar to allures in French, or in English. Doesn't really have a meaning, just a sound that you make while thinking or trying to get attention. Kawaii, cute. Rishinchi no Jutsu, art of the gentleman dragon, a precursor phrase to a branch of Issei's personal techniques in this fic. Ammon, restful sleep or good night's sleep, a technique of Issei's creation which uses his draconic aspect of dominion to invade the target's body with magic, overwhelming their will and putting them to sleep for between 12 to 24 hours according to their strength relative to Issei. Doesn't work on targets with a powerful will or greater strength than the user. Rainer and Issei spoke until noon that day, the fallen angel informing her new host of the circumstances surrounding her. Apparently she was the designated leader of a cell for the Grigori, the fallen angel faction as led by the fallen governor Azazel. She had been placed in command of 3 other fallen angels, a contingent of 50 stray exorcists, and 1 special operative. She was the most powerful combatant they'd had, but from what Issei could tell that wasn't saying much. Donasik, her second in command, was the next most dangerous, followed by Middelt and then Calawarner. However, the differences were largely nominal. They all hovered between 9 and 10 times the power of a normal human, none of them breaking that barrier. The contingent of strays were, to put it bluntly, cannon fodder. Apart from their light-based weapons, they were just ordinary humans who got kicked out of the church and ran to the Grigori. However, the special operative, stray exorcist freed cells in ... He was another matter. Kicked out of the church at age 17 for killing anyone and everything that got in between him and anything he could get away with slaughtering. He was certifiably insane. He admitted himself that he only joined the exorcists so he could kill people. Having left, he kept right on slicing his way through devils, both stray and otherwise, as well as anyone he could track down who had summoned one, often continuing on to their immediate family and neighbors. He was a serial killer of the worst kind, his victims often showing signs of torture and sexual violence both pre- and post-mortem. He was the worst kind of human, closer to a demon than a man. And he was also loose in Kuo, based out of the old church, the one where Rainer's superior had been sending an innocent former nun. No way in hell, was the Brunnet's simple and succinct response to that, echoed by Scott, supported by D. Drake, and very well received by Rainer. With basic descriptions of each fallen and of Selzen, Issei knew what he was facing now. Rainer's attack on him had been a personal mission, so as far as her cell knew she had just up and vanished, and was probably dead. That gave them the element of surprise, meaning that they would have the chance to intercept Asia before she was in their clutches. They set out some basic plans, and when that was done, Issei left the woman be to construct another disguise. It was one of the only techniques that a low-level fallen such as her could manage, apparently, alongside her light spears and flight. About 5 minutes later, Yuma Amano stepped out of the guest room, and the duo set off. The first thing they did was set about buying Rainer a wardrobe that wouldn't break down into component magic after a few hours or if it was disrupted by a powerful enough magical force. The Fallen took it as a chance to get a better idea of her host's personality and nature by asking for his help in picking out new clothes, including underwear, of course. She found that he rose to the challenge, despite having little expertise in such things and not really being able to offer an opinion beyond "you'd look good in anything, Rainer." Still, he did his best, even if he did end up quite red in the face before she allowed him to escape the lingerie store. As they left, she could hear some of the other shoppers whispering to each other, "So cute together ... Wish my husband could stick it out like that ... if I was a few years younger." Frowning to herself, the raven-haired woman secured her arms around Issei's left arm. The Brunnet looked across at her, one eyebrow raised in question. "The more we appear to be a couple," she informed him, "the better we fit in, and the less attention we draw." The Emperor considered for a moment, then nodded and smiled at her. "Right then, Yuma-chan. In that case, would my wonderful girlfriend care for ice cream?" Her jaw almost dropped at how easily he slipped into the role, but she shook it off and smiled back. The action seemed far easier than when she normally donned a mask. "I'd love some, Issei-kun." And so they wandered off, though Issei gently extracted his arm after a few steps and took her hand instead. A gentleman didn't infringe on a lady's personal space without good reason, after all. About 2 hours later, the two arrived back at the Hyoudou home, several thousand yen lighter. "Right," Issei muttered aloud as he went for his keys. "So, we got you several new outfits, some generic stuff that should hopefully fit Asia when she arrives, enough food to last 3 people for at least a week, and we've confirmed that Fried hasn't started murdering people left and right." He looked across at Rainer. "That everything?" The woman tapped her chin with an index finger a few times, before nodding. "I believe so. Though, there was that familiar following us." The door opened with a whisper of power, the wards feeding information to their creator even as they recognized his power signature. The two walked in, as Issei nodded. Going by its signature, it probably belonged to the devils from my school. The Brunnet locked the door behind them, the house's magical field sealing itself once more as Rainer chewed on her lower lip. "Is this going to be all right? I mean, if they know you're associating with a fallen angel." Issei waved off her concerns as he headed to the kitchen, setting down the bags containing women's clothes at the foot of the stairs. "It'll be fine. I can handle myself, but I doubt it'll come to blows in any case. I'm fairly certain that it's Gremory-senpai who's the boss around there, and she's always seemed reasonable. I'll talk things over, soothe any ruffled feathers, and maybe see if they can offer anything toward keeping Asia safe." Rainer leaned against a door frame, tapping her heel against the wall behind her. "Gremory, huh? Do you understand the importance of that name?" Issei nodded without turning around. "Gremory, one of the 72 pillars of Devil Society, right?" "That's correct," the woman acknowledged, "but the one you go to school with. Ria's Gremory. She's the current heiress to the family, and Serzech, Lucifer's little sister." The Brunnet froze in place, halfway through placing a bottle of milk in the fridge. Completing the motion with the bare minimum of shaking, he turned almost robotically to face his guest. "You mean ... that Lucifer, one of the 4 devil kings, the Crimson Satan?" A grave nod from Rainer. Slumping back against a cupboard, Issei rubbed at his eyes. "Right. So hostilities with Gremory-senpai just went from avoid if possible to bow and scrape to avert utter destruction." "Oh boy, remember my teachings, Issei," came the solemn tones of Scott, level-headed as always. "The gentleman is always accommodating to a woman's family. They are respectful of the elder siblings, kind to the younger siblings, do not flinch from the shotguns of the fathers, and always agree with the mothers." Right. Remember the code," he muttered to himself, trying to calm down. He'd heard a great many stories of Sirzech Lucifer's battle prowess from Drake, and the final result was that the man's name was enough to scare the bejesus out of him. Hitting himself together, he returned to sorting his purchases. Okay, thanks for the heads up, Rainier. I'll keep it in mind when I speak with her. Violet eyes remained fixed on the back of Issei's head, and their owner nodded slowly, adding knows when he's outclassed, but stands his ground anyway to her growing list of characteristics attached to Issei Hyoudou. Just so long as you stay safe, without your help, keeping Asia safe becomes much harder. Issei glanced over his shoulder, brown eyes hard with determination. I haven't forgotten, Rainier. I'll find her, and I'll keep her safe, even if it costs me my life. Then he turned back around and continued with his task, simultaneously planning their dinner for that night. Oh, Sunday had passed uneventfully. As was his ritual, as soon as he awoke, Issei looked to one of his prized possessions, a picture of two children. One obviously a younger version of himself, the other a widely smiling figure with oak brown hair and purple eyes, dressed in a tank top and shorts. He yawned and stretched, then rested two fingers on the shelf before the picture, where a simple silver cross rested. Be safe and be well, Arena-chan. It wasn't quite a prayer, after all, he was a dragon, and they were subservient to none. A dragon may choose to acknowledge a debt, may attach themselves to someone, may even follow their orders, but only out of respect. They would not be subjugated, would not be bribed, tempted, or threatened. One of their kind would only ever exist as an equal or a superior, and that meant that God was acknowledged, but not worshipped. Instead, he simply wished for his childhood friend to be happy and healthy, and hoped that she knew he was thinking of her. She had been a big part of his inspiration in leading the life of a gentleman, after all, and he'd sincerely promised to never forget her or let her pass from his thoughts. After that, he and Rainier spent the day training with one another in a local park after Issei set up a basic barrier to stop normal humans wandering inside. The Brunet had been training in close combat and magic under Scott for a very long time, and his draconic abilities had been tutored by Drake. As a result, he was a highly dangerous combatant even before he started boosting, and he kicked the fallen angel all over the place, with a break for lunch and ending at sunset. Once they returned to the Hyoudou home, the fallen zombie shuffled her way through eating a hearty meal, then retired to bed. Unbeknownst to her, once she fell asleep, Issei ghosted into the room and quietly constructed several magic circles around her. Scott had specialized in battle magic, but he'd picked up enough battlefield medicine for Issei to jury-rig a regeneration acceleration field around Rainier's bed. Unfortunately, it was energy-intensive enough to require Issei power it himself instead of letting ambient magic do the job. Not for the first time, as he yawned his way back to his bed, he found himself wishing that his house was built on a ley line. There were a couple in the city, but one was a stray devil hotspot and the other could only be properly accessed at Kyo Academy. As such, unless he wanted to make an explosive debut on the local devil's radar, it was better to just sleep it off. Monday rolled around, and Rainier found herself coming awake to a distinct lack of the aches and pains she had been expecting. A quick examination of her body revealed that the various scrapes, bruises, lacerations, and other injuries she'd suffered during her training with the Red Dragon Emperor had vanished. There was only one explanation for that, and once she was dressed she headed downstairs. It was about 7:30, and she found Issei eating cereal, reading the newspaper. He looked up at her once she entered the kitchen, smiling widely. Good morning, Rainier. Would you like me to make you something? She shook her head, moving to the cupboard where she vaguely remembered him placing the cereal the other night. No, thank you. She collected the box, pausing momentarily. But, seriously, thank you. For last night. She glanced back at Issei, whose brown eyes sparked slightly as he grinned. No need to thank me, Rainier. It would be unbecoming of a gentleman to offer a lady injury and not then make reparation. The fallen snorted, but smiled to herself as she moved to get some milk from the fridge. Yeah, you're a real gentleman. Whatever happened to don't hit girls? Issei chuckled. I realized that of all the people who can put me in my place, at least half are female. They got a proper laugh out of Rainier, and he joined in after a few seconds. When he arrived at school about an hour later, he was still wearing a massive grin after the fallen had bade him to come home safe at the door. Yes, there were days it paid to be a gentleman. The day went by without much incident. Classes were long and rather dreary, but he focused and got through them. A gentleman was knowledgeable, able to make easy conversation about many things or aid with miscellaneous tasks. He never knew when something he learned would be useful, so he tried to always pay attention. The smiles on his parents' faces when his report cards came back were always nice too. Still, after the final bell rang and he wondered if anything was going to happen at all, the chatter in the room suddenly rose to a crescendo and the Brunet turned around. Hello, Hyoudou-san. Immediately recognizing his peer standing in the door, Issei smiled widely. Good afternoon, Kiba-san. You're here to collect me, I take it. When the blonde offered a nod of confirmation, Issei picked up his now-packed bag and crossed the room, paying little attention to the blossoming rumors or the varied glares and curious glances. Then please lead the way, Kiba-san. Oh, the two young men left the main school building together, crossing the campus in amiable silence. Issei and Kiba didn't talk very much, but both were aware of each other. They each followed similar codes, after all, and it was the way of the gentleman to acknowledge others who upheld their lofty ideals. They arrived at the old school building, and the brunette felt the telltale humming of a barrier spell well before they crossed its threshold. Basic aversion ward, it feels like, he thought idly, comparing it to his own version. Though they functioned similarly, he believed this one was more powerful. It's to be expected, I suppose. Devils are naturally magical creatures, after all. The blonde led him up a flight of stairs and along a corridor, and they eventually reached a door where Kiba stopped. He knocked several times, and a female voice called for them to enter. They did so, and the two gentlemen entered, Kiba in the lead. "Issei Hyoudou-san to see you, Butchu," the blonde announced, then moved away, leaving Issei standing in the doorway and glancing around quickly. The room contained, as he had suspected, all the members of the Occult Research Club. Kaneko Taoju, Kyo's unofficial mascot, was eating something sweet on a couch, while sitting opposite her was Akino Hanjima, who he'd seen looking at him along with Rias the other day. The Gremory heiress herself was seated behind a desk, eyes focused on him as her fingers were steepled. Kiba had leaned himself against the wall, keeping an eye on everything like a bodyguard. And each one of them were naturally radiating a dark-tinted energy that D-Drake confirmed as being demonic in nature. "Issei Hyoudou-san," Rias greeted. "It's good to meet you face to face, at long last." The brunette smiled, bowing to 45 degrees and bringing his right arm across his chest at a diagonal to touch his left shoulder as he did so. "It's good to meet you too, Rias Gremory-san. It's not every day a lowly kohai such as myself gets to meet an esteemed lady such as you, after all." You're quite the flatterer, Hyoudou-san." That was Akino, chipping in with a beatific smile, her eyes narrowed to slits as seemed to be customary with her. Issei turned his smile on her, matching her expression almost flawlessly. "I give credit where credit is due, Hanjima-san. Please pardon me for not remarking upon your own appearance first, but if my guesswork is accurate, I do believe Gremory-senpai is the ultimate authority among this group." Expression unchanging, the other half of the two Great One-samas nodded. "That would be correct, Rias is our king." The brunette nodded to himself, turning once more to a bemused Rias. "Ah, this must be the evil peace system I have heard tell of. Details are scarce, but I seem to recall there was something to do with chess." The redhead nodded. "You hear correctly, Issei-sen. May I call you Issei?" "Of course, Gremory-senpai. Though, if I might be so bold, may I address you as Rias?" The heiress nodded, a beatific smile of her own appearing. "Of course, Issei-sen. My thanks," he smiled back at her. "Now, I suppose we are all aware of each other by now." The reply came from the only person who hadn't spoke yet, her quiet voice emanating from her place on the couch. "You're the Red Dragon Emperor, the wielder of the boosted gear." Nodding with a smile, not at all surprised that they'd figured it out after D-Drake's musings from the previous week, Issei replied. "That I am, Taoju-sen. And unless I am wide of my mark, you are all devils." Ria's smile was genuine as she nodded. Apparently she appreciated someone who was on the level. "Yes, we are Issei-sen." Apparently that was a cue, because there was a surge of demonic energy, and then a pair of bat-like wings sprang from each of the occupants' lower backs. The brunette let out an appreciative whistle, idly wondering if he'd ever figure out how to pull off a trick like that. "I can't say it's impossible, partner," D-Drake rumbled, "but no wielder of mine so far has managed to manifest wings outside of the Juggernaut Drive." Just the mention of that technique drew a barely noticeable shudder from the brunette. The boosted gear's ultimate form, it sacrificed the user's sanity and their life force to channel the full fury of the great Welsh dragon, which would proceed to tear the world around it to shreds, leaving nothing behind but a dead wielder once its rampage ended. Most definitely not a good trade-off for wings. Still, he'd figure it out one day. If they were willing to prove themselves, he may as well do likewise. Boosted gear. The familiar rush of power rose up inside him, the lighting in the room going up a notch momentarily as the crimson gauntlet built itself up around his left arm. The final wisps dispersed as he clenched his fist, the draconic aura it emitted immediately noticeable even in the face of 4 demonic auras. The boosted gear. Rias breathed, her eyes fixed on the Longinus. "To think I'd actually get to see it up close." Issei let her look for a good 10 seconds before clearing his throat politely, prompting the devil to break out of her trance. She flushed a bit, settling back in her seat from where she'd been leaning forwards. "My apologies, Issei-sen," she mumbled. The brunette waved her off. "It's nothing, Rias-senpai. Your reaction is similar to mine, after all." He offered her a disarming smile, and she returned the gesture. "So, shall I ask why I'm here? We've been living alongside one another for a year now with no issue. What's changed?" He knew damn well, but he wanted to see how she phrased her answer. He was fairly sure she realized that as well, because a calculating look appeared in her eyes as she once again steepled her fingers. "As you say," she began, "we've lived without issue for the past year. However, we recently gained a better idea of your nature, and I wish to approach you with a certain offer." Here, she gestured to the still-seated Kaneko, who had returned to her snacks. "I had Kaneko-chan keep an eye on you, so that I could get a better idea of how to do so." The white-haired girl didn't react to being included at all, and Issei simply nodded to himself. He hadn't actually noticed her, he'd simply assumed that Rias had been keeping tabs on him via well-concealed familiar. Apparently, the younger girl had some experience in suppressing her magical signature. "Last week, she informed me that you had been approached by another party, one of the fallen angels which have settled in the city." Here, Issei almost raised an eyebrow. So, they'd known about it, however, they had made no move to approach him in the run-up to the date. They'd been testing him. He didn't let his comprehension show though, his features arranged into polite curiosity. She continued to observe you throughout the day, and towards the end she witnessed the confrontation between you and the fallen. She then kept an eye on you until you reached your home and reported back to me. An admission that she knew where he lived. Not a big leap, considering devils apparently ran this school and she was highly placed in that society, but holding that information could be seen as establishing a position of power. The young woman leaned back in her chair. So, I decided we should meet with you, to try and understand your plans, since you apparently chose to spare an aggressor, going so far as to offer her sanctuary in your own home, despite her nature. Ah, Issei snapped his fingers, as if just coming to a conclusion. So, you wish to know if I'm siding with the fallen angels and plan to wipe you, your club, the student council and Kyo Academy off the face of the earth, correct? Brown eyes took in the whole room as he made his response. He wanted to see how they reacted to what could be seen as a veiled threat. Kaniko's expression didn't change, but she moved herself to better place herself between Issei and Ria's. Kiba's hand opened somewhat, as if to grip a hilt that wasn't there, as his upper body leaned forward, one foot placed against the wall to facilitate a launch. Akino's expression shifted slightly, odd shadows appearing as she began to exude predatory malice. Issei was fairly sure he could see yellow sparks dancing at her fingertips. Rias herself didn't make any obvious movements, but her steepled fingers were pointed conspicuously in his direction, and the aura around her had gone up a notch in terms of power. Oddly enough, that hadn't happened until he'd mentioned the club. So she cared more for her subordinates than for herself, eh? Issei himself kept his expression fixed for a second longer, then allowed the mask to break as his mouth twisted into a genuine smile. Ah, so it's like that, eh? Understanding flashed across Ria's face, and she shook her head slightly, acknowledging that she'd been outplayed. It's okay everyone, she told them. Issei-sen was just probing. 3 pairs of eyes glanced toward the redhead, but each member of the club settled themselves. Issei's smile grew wider. They all have trust in her. Another good sign. Indeed, Dedrag chimed in, this devil has inspired loyalty in her followers. She shows promise. A good lass, it would seem. With Scott's input, offering his own support. I hope you can forgive me, Ria-senpai, Kiba-san, Taoju-san, Hanjuma-senpai. He told them all, glancing at each in turn and offering a smile. But I've not had dealings with devils before, and I wanted to see what kind of people I would be living alongside. His smile grew wider. If it helps, I am quite pleased. Rias accepted the compliment with a regal nod, and the mix of a slight grunt from Kiba, a giggle from Akino and a slightly warmer silence from Kaniko gave him his other answers. To give you your answer, Ria-senpai, he continued, yes, I have taken the fallen angel Rainier into my home. However, perhaps I should explain the circumstances. So he did, informing the group of how he suspected the woman had been kept under her superior's thumb through some form of threat. How she'd made a desperate plan to save an innocent. How that plan had initially gone incredibly wrong but had led to Issei deciding to back the mission himself. And that's it, he concluded. Rainier and I are going to keep Argento-san safe as soon as she comes within our sphere of influence. As this will likely provoke the contingent at the church, I plan to take advantage of their reaction to remove the threat. What happens after that is anyone's guess, though I will be offering accommodation to both Rainier and Argento-san if they will accept. Rias tapped her chin with a finger. Ah, I think Kiba-kun mentioned this, never leave a woman in distress, correct? The brunette grinned. Indeed, Rias-senpai, one of the core tenets of the gentleman's code. A hum of affirmation came from the blonde against the wall, and the Gremory heiress nodded idly. Well, I believe I understand the situation now. You've allayed any fears I might have had, Issei-san. In fact, I do believe I feel better knowing that someone with such power as you possess lives by such a selfless code. Issei bowed his head. I do what any man should do, Ria-senpai. Nothing more and nothing less. The redhead shook her head. And so modest, as well. She looked at him out the corner of her eye, a coy grin stretching her lips. You wouldn't be interested in joining my peerage, would you? You've been candid with me, so I'll respond in kind. You're just about everything I could hope for in a peerage member. You're intelligent, good-hearted, and extremely powerful. There are devils out there who might trade their family members for the chance to have the Red Dragon Emperor in their peerage. Issei raised one eyebrow. But not you, Ria-senpai. Ria shook her head, a smaller smile in place now. No, not me. I'm a Gremory. You see, to us, our peerage are family, and thus are more important than anything. Tempting though you may be, Issei-san, I would not trade my peerage for you. Even as his smile grew wider, Issei knew he'd probably never have a problem with Ria's Gremory. Devil or not, she had a good heart, she loved her peerage, and they loved her in return. They had grown close from that love, and that made them both admirable and very dangerous. His kind of people. I will consider it, he told her honestly. But it would have to wait until after this situation with Argento-san is concluded. Being attached to such a prominent devil as yourself before entering into combat with the fallen may not be the most tactically sound arrangement. The redhead smiled again, nodding in agreement. I understand perfectly, Issei-san. All I ask is that you think about it. She paused, thinking of something, then continued. You should also know, if you do make that choice, I'd have no issue with your continued association with Rainier. You have described her as a good person, and while I may find it odd that I can actually say this, I will not discriminate against her based on her race alone. The brunette's smile grew even wider. Oh yes, this one will go far in time. He bowed again, his smile genuine as he rose back up. That's good to hear, Ria-senpai. Thank you for having me and for understanding. He glanced to each of the other devils in turn. Kiba-san, Taoju-san, Hanjima-senpai. Be well, and have a pleasant evening. With that and another, shorter bow, he turned and left the room without a sound. Oh, as the door swung closed behind the Red Dragon Emperor, Rias reclined in her chair with a wide smile. That meeting, in her opinion, couldn't have gone better. It would appear that the Issei Hyoudou she had been observing for this past year was, indeed, the real Issei Hyoudou, a gentleman in every way, a powerful individual who chose to remain humble but wasn't above a little cunning every now and again. Oh, I just have to get him in my peerage. With him, I could take the underworld by storm. Not to mention, as her thoughts turned in that direction, her bright smile darkened a touch. That date was getting closer and closer, and her protests were falling on deaf ears, it seemed. Before she could grow morose, a small hand rested itself on the back of her own, which had clenched around one of her chair's arms. Attached to that small hand was Kaneko, whose face remained as impassive as always but who was offering her one of her sweets with her free hand. It's fine, but you. The Nekashu was always a girl of few words, but the redhead appreciated them all the same as she offered the younger girl a slightly melancholic smile, taking the sweet and letting the flavor lift her spirits a little. So, that is Issei Hyoudou. The lack of her usual teasing lilt would have been jarring to anyone hearing Akino's normal tone for the first time, but as the Queen of Ria's peerage stared at the closed door, her eyes were open and calculating. A dragon who would consider being a devil, and who would take in a fallen angel for the sake of helping a nun. From the wall, Kiba chuckled. What do you expect? He's a gentleman, he'll never turn someone away out of hand. The blonde swordsman shook his head. No, Issei's the epitome of what we others try to achieve. He's James Bond, Alfred Pennyworth and Lucifer himself wrapped up together and distilled. Gray eyes glanced out the window into the gathering dusk, just barely catching the shrinking silhouette of the man himself as he headed toward the school gates. If he becomes a part of our peerage... he'll never turn, never snap, never raise a hand or voice. Kiba turned to his king, and there was a warning tone. But don't forget, Butchu. He's a dragon, too, and they don't do subservience. Kaneko hummed from where she'd retaken her seat. Won't get angry, we'll get even. And as she thought about the young man she had just spoken with, Rias understood what her rook meant, and sincerely hoped she'd never come into conflict with Issei Hyoudou. I'm home, Issei called out, removing his shoes in the entryway to his home. He'd made it back without incident, thought he realized that he had been gone longer than expected. Somewhat hurried footsteps made their way from the living room, the raven-haired Fallen running her eyes up and down his frame from the doorway. You're all right. You were later than I was expecting. The brunette nodded, casually tossing his satchel up the stairs to rest against the wall without really thinking about it, then unbuttoning his jacket. I'm fine, Rainier. That meeting ran on a bit longer than I was expecting, that's all. This sensation... Is this what it feels like for a businessman to come home to his loving wife after a long day? Truly, there is no better life than that of a gentleman. Even as Issei relaxed in the bliss of his situation, Rainier eyed him. She offered to reincarnate you, didn't she? The brunette finally removed his jacket, hanging it over the back of his chair in the kitchen for retrieval the next morning. Yes, he replied, she did. He wasn't going to bother refuting it. There was no reason to keep it a secret, and his decision would likely affect Rainier too. Violet eyes narrowed as the Fallen examined her host, who was now gathering ingredients for dinner. You obviously didn't accept, not yet, at least. But for some reason I don't think you said no. Issei grinned to himself. Rainier was sharp. He knew she had some gifts along the lines of infiltration from her highly skilled acting as Yuma, but her ability to read people would serve her very well, and likely it already had. That's right, he informed her. I can see ups and downs to both choices, but one way or another I can't become a devil until after Argento-san is safe and your old cell have been dealt with. So, I told her I'd think about it. As the Red Dragon Emperor started putting their meal together, Rainier sat at the table and pondered. If Issei became a devil, she was convinced he'd rise quickly through their ranks. She was fairly sure that it was only high-class devils that could have peerages, meaning natural-born devils like the Grimoire heiress, or reincarnated devils that had distinguished themselves in some way. Issei was a well-trained, highly knowledgeable, quick-witted and politely cunning man with enough firepower to emerge victorious over a god. She was under no illusions as to his competence. He would definitely reach that level. Then, the question became, did she want to make herself subservient to Issei? True, she'd much prefer to work under him than ... that man. Certainly, she knew he'd treat her well. His every interaction with women she'd observed had been courteous and helpful, leaving a smile on every face. Except one or two boyfriends, but since he'd never once flirted, there wasn't much they could actually do about it. What it would mean becoming a devil, severing her last link with heaven by giving up her heritage. Could she do that? Could she turn her back on what she once was, in the interests of securing her future beside the Red Dragon Emperor? It was a long-term plan, and one that she would need to consider carefully. That wasn't even considering Asia, who she so hoped to save. If the nun was to be kept safe, then ideally she would need to be placed with someone who could stand up to and overcome that man. People like that were in short supply, and she was sitting in the same house of probably the only one currently residing in Japan. Elsewhere in Kyoto City, a middle-aged man with black hair and a dirty blonde fringe paused his video game as he sneezed. Rubbing his nose, thereby dragging his thumb through his goatee, he blinked somewhat reddened, light violet eyes. I wonder who's talking about me. Oh, if she could convince Asia to become a devil, to serve under Issei, then she would be guaranteed his protection. Surely, wouldn't the option of that protection be worth the choice to turn her back on the church which had abandoned her? And all of it was, of course, dependent on Issei choosing to become a devil himself. There were so many thoughts swirling in her mind. The fallen pressed her fingers to her temples and groaned slightly. A short moment later, there was the clink of cutlery as her brunette host set down a knife, fork, and a plate of fish and chips. If I might offer a recommendation, Rainier. She looked up at him, seeing a sympathetic grin. Rome wasn't built in a day, freedom wasn't won in a single riot, and no one planned their future in 5 minutes. Eat, then head off to bed and sleep on it. You don't need to find your answers immediately. You're going to live for a long time, after all. As he took a seat across from the open-mouthed Fallen, who was trying to understand how he'd managed to read her so effectively, Issei's grin became more light-hearted, humor glinting in his eyes. If I might say so, the lady may prefer to eat her dinner than any passing flies. Rainier's jaw snapped shut, and she offered a weak glare to her host before setting about eating. It was, as always, infuriatingly delicious. Several hours later, the Fallen lay on what she had come to think of as her bed, and simply wondered. If she followed the path she was contemplating right now, she would have tied her destiny to Issei's. They would be master and servant, although if her understanding of his character was right, then it would probably be in name only. They would likely be with one another until death, bound tighter than most married couples by the magic of the evil pieces. If her wish was to save Asia, then that meant staying alongside the former nun. So, if she wished for them both to be as safe as she could manage, then she had to convince the girl to make the same commitment. But she could admit to herself that she didn't need to decide just yet. Issei, should he choose to be reincarnated, would reach high-class devil, this was a fact. He would establish a peerage, and having a place in that group would likely do her far more good than harm. But that was a long way off, years at least. She could be patient, stick with him for now, and then make a decision when the time came. For now, she would be content to accept his hospitality and his aid in saving Asia. Eternally binding servitude was a topic for a later date. Several rooms away, Issei stared at his ceiling, thinking along similar lines. The difference, of course, was that he had more than his own judgment to rely on. Let's recap, he muttered, seemingly to himself. If we're reincarnated, then we get all the standard bonuses. Our magic will be more powerful, our body will be more powerful, we'll be overall more badass. We'll even get wings, which I'm man enough to admit are pretty damn tempting. On the other hand, we immediately alienate ourselves from agents of the other two factions, who will only be stopped from targeting us by a tentative ceasefire born out of mutually assured destruction. The daytime will weaken us, though that's probably not too big a deal considering how Ria-senpai and the others attend school. Plus, we'll be putting ourselves under Ria's control. We don't know how much though, because those evil pieces could do everything from absolutely nothing to completely mind control, and we wouldn't know till we took one. That about it? I believe so, laddie. If the sound of a tapping foot could have an emotional equivalent, that was what Scott gave off. Offering my opinion, it's a fairly sweet deal. Sure, we alienate two other factions, but let's face it, right now we're fair game for all of them, and I'd rather stand behind that Crimson Satan bloke than across a battlefield from him. Working with her wouldn't be so bad, I don't think. Both Issei and Scott turned their focus on D-Drag, who let out the closest thing a dragon could to a hum before replying. Several of my previous wielders have been devils. They tended toward the higher end of the curve so far as power went. I am inclined to accept, but only if we can impress upon that devil the requirements of working with a dragon. Yeah, I figure that'll be the sticking point, the brunette mused. If she can't understand that she'll be working with us, rather than us working for her, then we'll have to let her down gently. You guys didn't put me through those years of hell just for me to roll over and dance to someone else's tune at the first whiff of more power. Feelings of agreement came from both Dragon and Scott, and brown eyes closed as Issei sighed. I'll think about it more after Argento-san's safe. I can ask her about the church, and I've seen as much of the Grigori as I need to in any case. G-night, guys. Good night, partner. G-night, laddie. Oh, on a train miles away, but growing closer quickly, a small figure in a blue-gray dress, her golden hair covered by a white habit which fell down to her lower back, turned bright green eyes to the destination name emblazoned in LEDs over the door to the next carriage. Kyoto City. Maybe I can make some friends there. Compendium. Nekishu, a rare and powerful subspecies of Nekomata, renowned for their abilities with Senjutsu and Yaojutsu. After a certain event, the majority of them have been killed, leaving only 2 known members of the species. As he let his feet carry him on autopilot, tracing the familiar route from Kyoto Academy to the Hyoudou residence, Issei appeared to be utterly unaware of his surroundings. His eyes were glazed and unseeing, there was very little agency in his movements, and if not for the fact that he moved through the shoals of people like water down a drain, he might as well have been sleepwalking. Instead, he was focusing his, unfortunately rather meager, sensing abilities. Sensing was a basic ability attributed to just about anyone with a hint of magical power. Even normal humans could pull it off to a degree, which was one of the primary contributors to the sixth sense belief. At their level, all that they could really discern was if a supernatural was nearby and how dangerous it might be. As someone who was just stepping over the line from journeyman magician, based on Scott's rankings at least, Issei's ability should have been enough for him to identify any and all sources of magical power within a roughly 500-meter radius, as well as differentiate between them. Unfortunately, however, there was a problem. He was absolute crap at it. All three of them had tried to come up with explanations for his complete lack of skill in that direction, hoping to correct it. Unfortunately, however, they could never prove anything. The odds were it was just a point of natural talent, or lack thereof. Regardless, he was a terrible sensor, hence, he was forced to devote his entire attention to the act to get even a rough idea of what was going on in a 100-meter radius. Rather pitiful for someone with his degree of magical experience, but that was life, a gentleman makes do with what he has. I think that might be her, the brunet muttered to himself, idly sidestepping a gaggle of schoolgirls and walking forward on the road for 2 paces to get around a businessman, stepping back onto the pavement just in time to dodge a car and ducking a gesticulating teen. Good odds, laddie, Scott concurred. It wasn't as prevalent in my time, of course, but I ran into a few faithful. This feels about right. Drake growled. Yes, I recognize the touch of the one God. The Red Dragon Emperor's relationship with the being that Christians referred to as God was ... an interesting one, to say the least. The sacred gears had been crafted by God, using the sealed souls of various supernatural creatures from dragons to the Fae, and served as prisons for those souls. However, as a secondary effect, they gave the humans to which they were attached abilities which could be used to fight back against supernatural influence. The boosted gear served as D-Drag's prison, and had done since near the end of the Great War between the devils, angels, and fallen. At first, the dragon had been enraged beyond belief, driving his wielders to insanity and quickening their demise. For a long time, to be born with the boosted gear was to be born to a cursed life. It had taken several centuries for the Welsh dragon to calm down, and even longer still until he was able to see a bright side. Yes, he was trapped in a gauntlet, likely for eternity, the only changes being the voice of his wielder and the environment in which he lived, which was altered to reflect the soul of his current host. By the time he met Issei, D-Drake had come to find some enjoyment in the quiet of the boosted gear. By forming a contract with his wielders, he could still connect to the outside world through their senses. He could see humans advance, could hoard the knowledge he gleaned from each new wielder as he had once hoarded his power, and could even find occasional intelligent conversation. He even got to taste combat, the thrill of battle as he offered his strength to the one whose soul he was anchored to. So D-Drake had a conflicting stance on the Christian God. He was looked on negatively for daring to seal a dragon, an act of domination which one of his race could simply not accept. However, that sealing was, in some ways, a gift, and dragons looked favorably upon gift givers. It was quite the conundrum, and the sheer amount of time D-Drake had spent thinking about that God assured Issei that the Welsh dragon would recognize his blessing anywhere. Right then, let's track her down. It took about 5 minutes to slip through the crowds and reach the magical signature that he'd registered on the edge of his senses almost the moment he left school. His approach to tracking via magic was basically hot or cold. He headed in a direction, and if the feeling became stronger, then he was getting closer. Foolproof, crude, but foolproof. Right, the brunet cast his gaze around. She should be somewhere around here. Kaya. The sudden, feminine cry hit Issei's head, snapping around in an instant, focusing on its source. Lying on the ground, next to a suitcase which had burst open, was the source of the faithful signature he'd been following. Striding over quickly, he compared the girl before him to the description Rainier had given him. Though she wasn't standing, she was definitely petite, perhaps as much as a full head shorter than him. She might have weighed half of him soaking wet, though the conservative blue-gray dress she wore concealed her figure. The snow-white habit she was wearing had come askew, allowing locks of golden hair to glint in the sunlight, and when her eyes opened they were green like summer leaves. Found her. Are you all right, Aju-sama? Those incredibly bright green eyes met his own, and he extended a hand to her as he knelt down, holding her gaze. Divided by. Thank you very much. Divided by. The girl took his hand, and he gently placed the other a bit further up her arm to help her stand. She was, indeed, extremely light. Even taking into account his somewhat inhuman physique, it felt like he was lifting a pillow. I don't recognize that language, Scott admitted, a frown in his voice and on his face. Neither do I, D-Drake told them, but we foresaw this. Partner, try that spell you were working on. Nodding, more to himself than to the girl before him, Issei's eyes unfocused for a moment as his mind's eye conjured a circle. It was quickly filled in with other circles, triangles, and squares, beginning to rotate as its outer rim filled in with characters plucked from every language between Greek and Elder Futhor, phrases in Greek, Latin, and even older languages winding themselves through the geometry. Once it was complete, he exerted his will on the power that he was born with and then trained mercilessly to expand, turning the circle from a fancy thought exercise into an effect on the material world with a mental invocation. Rushinchi no Jutsu, Rikai, shaking his head a bit to clear it, now that the spell was sustaining itself via his magic. Issei smiled at the slightly confused girl whose hand he still held. Divided by I apologize, it's not every day I get to meet such a beautiful girl, I fear I must have appeared very rude. Divided by, though her cheeks flushed red, Asia shook her head quickly. Divided by no, not at all, though you don't have to say such nice things. Divided by then, she seemed to realize that she'd understood him. Divided by you speak Italian. Divided by, so that's what she was speaking, hey. Divided by I dabble, divided by he told her with a grin. Divided by, to be able to converse with a lady such as yourself is more than worth the learning, in my opinion. Divided by her cheeks went red again, and although his expression didn't change, the brunette did an internal happy dance. Those red cheeks, those demure eyes, those shuffling feet. Take that, you damamos, the nice guys always win in the end. Divided by as glad as I am to speak with you, miss, shall we gather your things before we continue? Divided by Asia blinked once, before her eyes widened and she immediately knelt down to begin gathering the clothes that had scattered in her fall. Issei crouched opposite her, folding each garment as he picked it up and hanging it over his left arm. He did make sure to leave her unmentionables be, though shopping with a centuries-old fallen angel was one thing, grabbing a nun's panties was an entirely different proposition. Asia herself gathered the various white and frilly things, while Issei built a decent pile of dresses, blouses, skirts and other things he wasn't well acquainted with. When everything had been collected and returned to the rather large suitcase, he gently stopped her from trying to lift it, instead doing so himself. He slung it over his back in the same hand as his satchel, basking in the look of awe on Asia's face as he so casually lifted the weighty container. Divided by now, miss, divided by he smiled at her, divided by I must apologize for not introducing myself earlier. Divided by with his free hand, he gently lifted one of hers and brushed his lips across the back, his touch feather light and easy to escape if she were so inclined. Divided by, my name is Issei Hyoudou, divided by he told her as he straightened. Divided by, might I have the pleasure of yours? Divided by, still with a healthy pink glow in her cheeks, the demure blonde clasped her hands together in front of her, but smiled back at him. Divided by my name is Asia Argento. It's very nice to meet you, Issei. Divided by the pleasure is all mine, divided by he assured her. Divided by, now, where is a woman such as you going in this city without an escort? Divided by green eyes shifted downward, the girl shuffling her feet a bit. Divided by, I was headed to the church. Divided by, I believe I know the place, divided by Issei mused. Divided by, well, if you would allow it, I should love to accompany you on your way. Divided by he offered her his arm, and after a moment Asia hooked her right arm through his proffered left. Divided by, thank you. Divided by she mumbled, and the brunette just smiled at her as they began to walk, the pavement seeming to clear in a small radius around them, people stepping out of their path without even noticing they were doing so. Just one of the many tricks you could pull off when you happen to contain the dragon who stole the principle of dominion from God. Divided by I assure you, Asia, that walking with you is more than thanks enough for this small effort. Divided by Asia flushed red again at that, squeezing his arm a little tighter as they strolled. Internally, Issei was thinking back to the plan Rainier had put together. 2 days earlier. 3 days. That's the maximum time we'll have to prepare. Rainier and Issei were sitting across from one another at the kitchen table, each with a cup of tea in front of them, discussing how they were going to get Asia away from the Grigori. Unfortunately so, the Fallen told him. Most likely less. We managed to get a pretty good list of notable individuals in the area. Your name is on that list, though it's not very high up. Once they realize she isn't coming, they'll immediately begin checking names off until they find her. Issei grunted, possibilities spinning through his mind. I just realized we might not even get the chance. Rainier frowned. What do you mean? He gestured aimlessly with one hand. I hadn't thought of it before, but you said that Argento-san was coming here of her own accord because she'd received an offer from your former group, correct? The woman nodded, and he continued. Then we can hardly just intercept her and take her straight here. She must come of her own free will, otherwise there's the risk of her running back to them, which will make keeping her alive a far more difficult prospect. Rainier thought about it, then cursed under her breath. You're right, of course, I guess I'd forgotten that she'll think for herself. The woman laughed, the hollow sound bearing no joy. Is this really what a few centuries of being a fallen has done to me? I've started to think of humans as objects now. A strong hand wrapped around one of her own, which had been curled into a fist in the middle of the table. It's all right, Rainier, he told her, his sympathetic gaze and encouraging smile preventing her from falling into self-recrimination. No one could spend the amount of time you have in that situation without consequences. But you're free now, your own woman. You'll heal in time, but until then you are still a good person. Patting her now loosened hand once, Issei stopped leaning forward, his smile becoming lighter. I'll admit to not thinking the best of my more mundane peers at times. It can be frustrating at times. But for now, I believe the answer to our predicament is fairly simple. One dark eyebrow rose, the Fallen shelving her negativity for another time. Indeed, Issei nodded. If we need her to come with us of her own will, then all we have to do is expose the cell's true colors. His eyes flashed. And I know the perfect way to do it. Present. Issei's musings were cut short by the sound of crying. Both he and Asia turned together, eyes alighting upon a young boy, cradling his knee and sobbing while his mother rubbed his back gently. Just as he thought she might, Asia gently disengaged herself from his arm and hurried over to the duo, kneeling down in front of the boy with a kind smile, cupping her hands over the wound. Divided by they're there now. Divided by she murmured, her words less important than the tone with which she spoke. Divided by you're a big boy, aren't you? Big boys shouldn't cry. Divided by. The aura surrounding the girl, to Issei's senses at least, went up a few notches as a ripple of green light formed a ring on each of the girl's index fingers. Made from what appeared to be simple iron, a design reminiscent of half a snowflake rested between her first and second knuckles on the outside of her fingers. The glow persisted, energy flowing from the innocuous accessories and caressing the boy's leg. Having followed the girl, he could see from his position at her left shoulder that the split skin pulled itself together, the bruising fading away as the scrapes smoothed over. In a couple of seconds the damage had vanished completely, leaving an astonished duo. The mother gushed over Asia for a couple of seconds, before leading her son away as the boy waved back at them. Asia waved in return, while Issei just stood and smiled. A miracle healer indeed. Interesting, Diedreg commented. It is little wonder she was hailed as a miracle healer when she possesses the twilight healing. That's one of the few I ran into, Scott chimed in. Saved a great many lives it did. He paused, except that of its own wielder in the end. Issei just grunted slightly, acknowledging his mentor. Divided by that's a brilliant gift you possess, Asia. Divided by he told her. Divided by. I suppose it only makes sense that you can heal wounds of the body like your smile can so invigorate the spirit. Divided by. The blonde flushed once again, but this time she smiled, her joy overcoming her shyness. Divided by yes, this is the gift given to me by God himself, so that I could make the world a better place in his name. Divided by clasping her hands together, the former nun mumbled what was likely a prayer as Issei stood by her. So, she maintains both her faith and her faith in the face of the church's rejection, Diedreg mused. There is a great conviction in this one, that she would remain true to her beliefs despite the pressure of so many others. Indeed, Scott agreed, the lass has a strong will to go with that kind heart. To think that some bastard tried to kill her, to take the gift she uses so selflessly and keep it for themselves. It wasn't a grunt that came from Issei this time. It was a growl, a sound that came naturally to him as, unseen by Asia, a flicker of color ran over his irids. It's confirmed. This man, whoever they are, walks a path I cannot condone. Even as he smiled, offering his arm to Asia once more, Diedreg and Scott could feel righteous conviction stealing in Issei's heart. There will be a reckoning. This I swear, as a gentleman and as a dragon. Divided by. So this is your destination, Asia. Divided by. The two teens were standing at the edge of the church's boundary, looking at it through the wide-open metal gates from beneath the cover of the tree line. The building was Gothic, shrouded in shadows and largely disconnected from everything else. Gargoyles were plentiful, and the whole place looked like it was in a pretty advanced state of disrepair. It looked like it needed a demolition notice, not inhabitants. Divided by yes, this is where I'm meant to be. Divided by glancing down at his companion, Issei felt the fires of resolution in his heart burning higher. The melancholy in her eyes, in her hollow smile as she looked up at him, did not belong on that face. Divided by in that case, shall we continue? Divided by Issei, it's fine, you don't have to. Divided by as the brunette began to stride forward, the former nun tried ineffectually to slow his advance, pulling back on his free arm. He barely felt it, though he took care to keep from pulling her over. Instead, he was focused on the rising bloodlust emanating from the building in front of him, and the same tainted energy that he'd first felt from Rainier. There was another, too, something even worse. It was largely human, but twisted, as if something intrinsic had been beaten into a different shape, drowned in filth and horror. This was the feeling of evil, it would seem. I guess this must be freed. Mind yourself, laddie, Scott warned him, tone hard. I felt as like before, you can never know what they'll do. Half the time they're cowards, then they're running up the shaft of your sword to take a swing at you. The emotional equivalent of spitting on the ground echoed from the boosted gear. Things like him ... they're not human anymore. Diedreg didn't say anything. His own rising bloodlust, burning hot with righteous anger and cleansing flame, told it all. Divided by well, if this is the place where a lady such as yourself has been told to come. Divided by swinging Asia's suitcase and his own satchel off his shoulder, the Red Dragon Emperor laid them gently to the side as he approached the door. Calling up his power as, hidden by the sleeve of his jacket, magic circles began to light up along the length of his arm, interlocking like a chain as they spun. Divided by. We must ensure it is worthy of you, mustn't we? Divided by. In one smooth motion, Issei gently extracted his arm from Asia's grip, picked her up around the waist and placed her behind him. Then he completed his turn, right arm cocked back, flooded with power as D-Drag offered up his energy to combine with Issei's human reservoir. This wasn't one of his name techniques, it was nothing complex, nothing fancy. Just a basic magic to kinetic energy transformation circle, followed by a chain of interlocking amplification circles, and concluding with a directional circle to dictate where all the energy went. It was basic magecraft, but when you put that kind of force multiplication on a near superhuman teen, then factor in draconic energy reserves. That's when it becomes something special. The palm strike hit dead center on the church's doors, kinetic energy rushing forward in amounts normally attributed to trains and freight lorries. The power shook the wood beyond its ability to remain cohesive, dissolving the barriers into a high-velocity rain of inch-long splinters. Behind what used to be a door was the source of the bloodlust Issei had been feeling, eyes widening and arms rising to protect faces. Standing in front was a silver-haired man in his mid-20s, dressed in a priest's robes and brandishing a sword hilt in one hand, a bulky handgun in the other. His features were twisted by a combination of insanity, hatred, and arousal. Yes, this was most definitely Fried Selzin. Behind him were arrayed a large number of figures in white robes, carrying hilts of their own as they cried out and cowered before the wooden rain. Lined up at the back of the church, hovering on black wings, were the final members of Rainier's cell. 1 male, 2 female. Donasik, clad in a trench coat and fedora. Calla Warner, blue-haired in a maroon dress bearing a ridiculous amount of cleavage. And Middle, with the appearance of someone barely starting their junior's years at high school and dressed in the Gothic Lolita style. All three flinched at the destruction of the door, but they were out of the line of fire for now, so they stood back. Scott just spat again. Cowards, throwing cannon fodder at us, before they try to sweep in for the kill, undoubtedly. Issei concurred, but for now he needed his mouth for other things. Asia was still behind him, trembling slightly, and he glanced over his shoulder to give her a reassuring look. Divided by no need to worry, Asia. You just keep an eye on our things for now. Divided by he turned back around, and as soon as they were out of Asia's view, his brown eyes started to glow a dull crimson. Divided by I just need to tidy up first. Divided by. He began to walk forward, reaching inside his jacket while he did so. He pulled out a single black leather glove, pulling it onto his right hand as he advanced, eyes glowing. The moment it was fully on, he clenched his fist around the garment, and complex lines of symbols lit up all over it, feeding into a magical circle on the back. At the same time, a whirl of crimson formed the boosted gear on his left hand, its emerald glowing with D-Drag's activity as the countdown started. As he walked, he released all the suppressants he normally kept on his power to avoid detection. The aura of the Red Dragon Emperor reared high, a dragon in its own right that set most of the stray exorcists to gasping as they found themselves unable to breathe, while Selzin hissed and cursed, and the fallen dropped several inches in the air. My name, the Brunnet began, is Issei Hyoudou. I'm a second year in high school, an acceptable cook, a fair hand with a needle, and a decent conversationalist. I'm also the Red Dragon Emperor, by the grace of God, the Great Welsh Dragon, and my own free will. Quite a few of the exorcists had collapsed now, passing out from the pressure on their minds or from lack of air, while Selzin had activated his lightsaber. It hissed a life, actinic light in the shape of a blade, deadly to the touch. Not that it would ever touch him. The fallen had conjured light spears, yellow, blue, and pink weaponry glowing with the once pure power of God. Not that it would dirty his clothes. But above all, he continued, settling into a boxing stance, I am a gentleman. He stood ready, one hand sheathed in crimson metal and glowing emerald, the other smoldering with scarlet light as leather creaked in his fist. His eyes were aglow, his hair waving in a breeze as his aura imposed itself on the world around him. His tone had remained perfectly civil from the moment he demolished the door, and as he leaned forward for his charge, he completed his introduction. And I do not forgive those who put ladies in distress. Boost. The first casualty wasn't really anyone important. He was average in every way, brown hair, brown eyes, a bit over 5.5 feet tall, neither thin nor fat, his robes unremarkable, his weapon one of many copies. Black leather met his face in a right straight, and he went out like a light as the lightsaber fell from limp fingers, his body rising in an arc that carried him into the wall at the opposite end of the church, where he crumpled against the stone before falling down, sprawling on the floor and laying there, battered but alive. That was the power of the glove that Issei had fashioned for himself under Scott's careful instruction, as a test to see if he was ready to make the step from apprentice to journeyman. It softened his blows just enough, turned enough force to make jelly from a man's torso into a non-lethal strike. Then it saved that power, running it through the boosted gear, where D-Drag channeled it back into Issei. A system that expended just enough energy to incapacitate a given foe based on their innate magic resistance, their physical durability, and several other things determined by the many glowing characters running across the fingers and knuckles of the artifact. The Tenohira no Jiabukai Ryu, or as Issei liked to refer to it affectionately, the bitch slap. It claimed 7 more victims in the next 4 seconds. 3 rapid-fire jabs, each to a face, each resulting in an airborne exorcist. When they began to raise their arms, he spun rapidly, the back of his hand meeting 3 sets of ribs in quick succession, shattering bones and causing instant incapacitation, bowling over lines of hostiles with 3 men-turned projectiles. His senses, heightened by magic and adrenaline, warned of a foe approaching from behind, and he turned swinging. His uppercut brought the man to the ceiling, and his subsequent fall took him out of the fight. Finally, the larger force began to react, turning on the dragon that had appeared in their midst. His speed and strength multiplied to 16 times his norm, and that in itself was already 2 or 3 times the human norm. Right now, Issei was operating at roughly 48 times the power of these opponents, and it showed. They tried to dogpile him, no strategy beyond stick him with the pointy end, confident that weight of numbers would be more than enough to bury the teen. They realized their mistake quickly enough. With a cold grin, their target vanished before the tide of humanity could wash over him, leaving only displaced air. Before they could reset themselves, cries started going up from the other side of the horde, followed quickly by the people who had let them loose. Another 15 exorcists went down in rapid succession, their blades never coming close to Issei as he ducked and weaved amongst them, breaking ribs, offering express trips to the ceiling and walls, disabling the odd limb here and there for some variety. He went through them like the finest sushi chef went through salmon, with precision and grace that never faltered, without ever once allowing his opponents to entertain the idea of victory. When the number of exorcists conscious had fallen to somewhere around 10, the more competent combatants finally had an unimpeded line of attack. Or perhaps they simply ran out of patience. Selzen started screaming profanities, charging forward with his blade held ready, bursts of light energy flying rapidly from the barrel of his handgun, all impressively close to Issei's center mass for someone firing one-handed on the run. At the same time, a volley of light spears began to rain from near the ceiling, spiteful comments and fanatical ranting echoing from the fallen. Issei didn't deign to respond. Instead, he met Selzen's charge head-on, batting away his shots expertly with the boosted gear while he sidestepped and spun around the rain of spears, not cutting off the game of chicken as his glowing red eyes held the stray exorcist's almost purple orbs, ablaze with madness. As the lightsaber swung for his head, the Red Dragon Emperor simply crouched beneath it, before using his new stance to place the full strength of his legs, back and arms behind his right hand as he applied his will to his glove, consciously lowering the restraints it put on him. The uppercut he delivered to Selzen broke his jaw, shattered all his teeth, sliced off a decent portion of his tongue, and whiplashed his neck badly enough to strain his spine, all in the half-second before the remaining energy lifted him off his feet like a rocket. The silver-haired monster collided with the ceiling in under 2 seconds flat, immediately pulverizing the aged wood and flying free into the night sky, curving out of sight as he began to fall. Issei paid him no attention. He was just trash to be taken out, not worth acknowledging beyond the necessary effort. Finally, he turned his focus to the closely grouped team of 3 fallen hovering the ceiling, his dull red eyes piercing all shadows and easily picking out the fearful expressions they were covering with rage and vitriol. He didn't bother to listen to their hurled insults as he zigzagged forwards, fists held up in front of his chest, no light spear getting within 5 inches of him. Then he crouched and pushed off, lifting into the air like a missile. Donasek's eyes widened, and he tried to get a light spear up to defend himself, but he'd just thrown the one in his hand, and he was too slow to create another. He tasted blood as a leather-clad fist buried itself in his gut, eyes going blank and rolling up in his head as even the fallen's supernatural resilience failed before a dragon's might. He went completely limp, not even reacting when he was dragged down to earth by Issei's own fall, the teen using his unresponsive frame as a makeshift landing pad upon touching down, then immediately rolling away with his remaining momentum to stand and face the 2 female fallen. Both were shaking where they hovered, and although his first instinct was to talk them down, he was well aware that these 2 would have been willing co-conspirators in Asia's murder if not for Rainier's last-ditch gamble. No, there was a time for being a gentleman, and right now this was not it. He needed to be a dragon, and see all before him as opposition to be crushed. Though he could still pull his metaphorical punches, just a bit. Both the boosted gear and the Tennohira rose up, palms facing the fallen as magic circles burst to life over both, fairly simplistic in their design but for the crest at their center. It was an Unkyu sigil, one he had designed himself years and years before. A pair of leathery wings, unfurling from a shield bearing the emblem of 2 interlocking hands above a scroll bearing minute text reading Victoria Ius et in Reverentia. This was Issei's symbol, the one he felt best encapsulated what he tried to be. The ultimate gentleman, the Red Dragon Emperor, he was both, and he would forge a new balance from his nature. He would become the gentleman dragon. That was the goal he had set for his own life, and that was what he worked towards every day. So he would rain judgment like a dragon, but like a gentleman, he would show restraint. D-Drake fed him power, and the draconic power augmented his own human reserves as the circles spun up, the fallen starting to move as if to dodge. Unfortunately for them, however, this was a spell tied closely into Issei's own nature, and it charged in under a second. Ryu no Jutsu, Ryu Richai. Twin columns of red power shot forward, their ends forming facsimiles of hands as they rose, wrapping around both fallen as if D-Drake had reached forward and grabbed them. Then, with a grunt of effort, the Red Dragon Emperor swung both his arms down, the now fully encapsulated, screaming fallen being dragged after the motion as the red energy constructs holding them in place followed Issei's limbs. There was a massive crashing noise as the arms reached the ground, dust rushing up and cracks running through the flagstones as the church itself seemed to shake. as he allowed the power he was using for the arms to fizzle out, causing the constructs to break apart into motes of light. The teen sighed wearily. He'd used up a bit more energy than he'd planned to, but apparently he was still having trouble with the whole beating up women thing. By wrapping the fallen in the arms, instead of leaving them largely uncovered, he had prevented them from actually striking the floor. They would be bruised and discombobulated, but there would be no broken bones or shocked organs, unlike with Fried and Donasik. Issei glanced around at the ruins of the church. Exorcists lay everywhere, a few groaning, most unconscious, none getting up anytime soon. The pews were lying all over the place, some broken from impacts, while a couple of windows bore signs of bodies passing through. The hole in the ceiling from Fried's exit was raining a smattering of dust and plaster, while Medoth and Calawarner's impact had effectively demolished the altar. 54 casualties, all but one confirmed non-lethal. Time elapsed, 2 minutes. He let out a long breath, the boosted gear vanishing in a glow as his eyes returned to their usual brown. Issei set about tugging off his glove, turning around and heading back to the church entrance. That was rather cathartic. Standing almost exactly where he'd left her, Asia was staring at him with conflicting emotions on her face. Awe and fear were at war, the conflict growing fiercer as he grew closer. When he was in arm's reach, she closed her eyes, whimpering slightly. But when a few seconds passed and nothing happened, she dared to look. Issei was kneeling before her, down on one knee with his head bowed, both hands resting on his left knee where it was keeping him upright. Eyes fully open, the blonde looked at the man before her in confusion. Divided by Issei. Divided by. A shallow nod displayed that the teen had heard her, and now that he had been acknowledged, he spoke. Divided by Asia, I must ask for your forgiveness. Divided by. Asia frowned, confusion becoming more prevalent as her fear died away, Issei's inaction taking away its fuel. Divided by my forgiveness. Divided by. Divided by indeed, divided by Issei agreed. Divided by you see, our meeting in town was no coincidence. Myself and my accomplice, Rainier, have been planning for your arrival here in the city these past 3 days. When I was able, I came looking for you, but made no mention of this to you. Divided by. The wielder of Twilight Healing was most definitely confused now. Divided by why? Why would you come looking for me? Why would you do this? Divided by she gestured to the church, and the brunet before her nodded as he accepted her question. Divided by Rainier is a fallen, she once led the group you see before you. Divided by he gestured to the church himself, still not looking up. Divided by. However, it came to her attention that you were being directed here under false pretenses, and that plans were in motion to claim your life in a ritual to seize your sacred gear, for the personal use of the Grigori. Divided by. There was an intake of breath, somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. Divided by they wanted to kill me. Divided by a rustle of cloth and a faint thump heralded the former nun falling to her knees in front of Issei, hugging her arms to herself. Divided by they told me they would give me a place to stay, that I could continue doing God's work. Divided by. Issei shook his head. Divided by I am sorry, Asia, but assuming they did not simply imprison you, you would have been forced to serve only them. Divided by and most likely in a further capacity than just a healer, he thought to himself. Fried had a long history after all, and there had been no women among those exorcists. Quiet sobs began to rack the girl's frame, tears coursing down her cheeks as she found herself, once again, betrayed. Divided by is this my fate? Divided by she asked, more of herself than Issei. Divided by. Moving from one master to another, never truly doing good. Divided by. Asia jumped slightly when a feather-light, yet powerful touch swept across her cheek, one warm thumb brushing the tears away. Divided by Asia. Divided by Issei began, still gently wiping away salty liquid. Divided by. I wouldn't know about fate, certainly, I cannot tell you your future, or how to live your life. Divided by. His voice became stronger as he cupped her cheeks gently, tilting her eyes to meet his own. Divided by but I have always lived my life in service to others, after a fashion. And I do not think I have ever found a soul more deserving of what aid I can offer than the one before me now. Divided by. He smiled at her, warm and gentle in a way that the girl hadn't seen since her days in the orphanage. Before Twilight Healing. Before the church. Before old men and old women, days of lectures and scripture. Before the angry shouts and the hurled insults as she was cast aside. Genuine kindness was written all over his face and in his touch as he moved his hands from her cheeks to her own hands, rising and taking her with him. Divided by Asia, would you come with me for a time? I can host you for as long as you wish, be it for a day or years. Divided by a spark played in his eyes as he offered her his arm once more, slinging their bags over his shoulder. Divided by there's someone at home who I think would like very much to know you're alright. Divided by. The former nun stared at the young man before her, the man who had faced down and defeated a church full of opponents because they planned to cause her harm. Who had prostrated himself before her afterwards, asking for her forgiveness, who had a warmth to his bearing she had sorely missed, even despite his obvious affinity for combat. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to stay with him, for now at least. She took his arm. We're home, Issei called as he entered his home, closing the door behind Asia as she followed him in. The girl looked around, taking in the quiet beige walls bearing pictures of the Hyoudou family as individuals or together, feeling the peaceful atmosphere that built up over time in true homes. Though it wasn't her specialty, she could even feel the quiet hum of magic running through the walls. It was soothing, like a cat's purr. Did it all go well? Asia looked up as a woman's voice emanated from one of the open doorways, speaking Japanese. It did, Issei replied in kind. Left a huge mess, but they're all alive. He paused. Well, Selzen might not be. But I can't really bring myself to care about trash like him. I'm glad we agree on that, Rainer replied, stepping out of the living room. She was dressed in a simple white blouse and jeans, her wings tucked away and her hair glossy in the light. Her gaze immediately fell on Asia, relief spreading across her features. She doesn't speak Japanese, Issei warned her, and the fallen nodded absently. Divided by, hello, Asia. Divided by, she greeted, speaking flawless Italian. Or so Issei assumed, anyway. Divided by you ... must be Rainer, right? Divided by, the girl replied slowly, a bit unsure. The woman just smiled and nodded. Divided by, yes, that's me. I suppose Issei told you about me then. Divided by, the blonde nodded, fidgeting slightly. Perceptive as she was, Rainer prompted her. Divided by, you must have questions, right? Go ahead and ask. We won't keep secrets from you. Divided by. After a second's pause, Asia gathered herself. Divided by, why did you decide to help me? Issei explained on the way back ... You put your life in danger for me. Why? Divided by. Rainer's smile became a touch melancholic as she nodded, straightening from where she'd leaned over a bit to put herself on the same level as Asia. Divided by, I suppose I expected that question. Come with me to the living room. This is a bit of a story, so we should be sitting down. Divided by. She glanced over at Issei, who had just come back down the stairs from placing Asia's suitcase in the spare room that had been prepared for her. Divided by, I'll go make some tea, shall I? Divided by, he exclaimed, reading the mood and bustling off to the kitchen as the two women seated themselves in the living room. Both were silent for a little while, before the fallen decided on where to start. Divided by, I suppose. Divided by, she mused. Divided by, that a big part of why I wanted to help you is around the reason I fell. Divided by, I was a guardian angel, you see. I would be assigned a child, and stay with them from birth until the age of 7. I would watch over them as much as I was allowed, trying to guide them away from danger and temptations, giving little nudges here and there to try and put them on a good path. Divided by, the fallen looked down at her hands, palms up towards her. Divided by, I was good at it. In fact, there were rumors that I might have been promoted to 4 wings for my work, an incredible honor. I was proud of my work and the children I helped, I was joyous at the good I was doing in God's name, and everything was almost perfect. Divided by, her open hands clenched into fists. Divided by, then everything went wrong. Divided by, the child I was watching was in a war zone. She was a frail little thing, like fine china, her mother and father were dead, and she had been taken in by the rebel forces as they tried to evacuate the country. I stayed with her at all times, whispering in her ear to try and keep her away from the worst, sitting with her at night to try and hold the nightmares at bay. Divided by. Tears swam in Rainer's eyes as her hands clenched tighter, bones creaking and blood beginning to run from the wounds her fingernails inflicted. Divided by, but in the end, I wasn't able to help her when she needed me most. Divided by, one of the soldiers they assigned to look after the children turned out to be a traitor. He put toxins in their food, and I didn't even know it until my little angel started to choke on her own blood. Divided by, she was crying properly now, tears dripping on her wounded hands. Divided by, there was nothing I could do. I was an angel of the Lord, a guardian angel, yet by heaven's laws I had no choice but to stand by and watch helplessly as she died. Divided by. Asia sat before the much older woman, tears in her own eyes. Divided by, Miss Rainier. Divided by. Divided by, I couldn't take it. Divided by, the fallen whispered. Divided by, I watched her pass on, and I just snapped. I refused to return to heaven. Not when I could see the way that monster in human flesh smiled to itself when the rebels found the children, how his soul rejoiced at the despair they felt. Divided by. Rainer's whole body was tense and shaking, long-buried rage coming to the fore as she relived her memories. Divided by, I broke the rules. I formed a light spear, the first time I had ever done so outside of practice, and I shattered the tie that bound me to heaven, that kept me unseen and untouched in the human world. Divided by, I fell, and at the same time I used God's light to burn a hole through a human's chest. Divided by, a hollow chuckle, all that was left after the grief and rage had run their course, tore free of Rainer's throat. Divided by, imagine. Millennia of perfect service, and then all at once I break my oath and shatter almost every rule in heaven's book. I can only imagine what Gabriel thought. Divided by. The woman sighed, leaning back in her seat as tear-stained cheeks looked to the ceiling. Divided by, afterwards, I had no choice but to join the Grigori. Unaffiliated fallen don't last long, especially weak ones like me. For centuries, I gloried in the slaughter of anyone I could convince myself was deserving, using sex, blackmail, and torture to get close to anyone I was ordered to or felt I had to. Divided by, and then I heard that I was expected to kill a child, to pull out an innocent soul for the selfish use of a monster. Divided by, Rainier looked like she wanted to spit at that, but held herself in. She was emotional, but that was no excuse to go making a mess for Issei to clean up. Divided by, I couldn't do it, I refused to do it. So I made a choice and tried to convince myself that if I could save just one person after all these years, it would be worth it. Divided by. She snorted, and there was a touch of genuine humor in it. Divided by, of course, you've seen how that turned out. Divided by. The fallen spread her arms wide. Divided by. And that's it. The whole sordid tale. I failed once and cost myself heaven ... and then I couldn't bear to be hurt in that way again. One poorly, or perhaps perfectly, chosen target later, here you are, safe and sound. Divided by. Finally, the woman slumped. She was exhausted now. She had never told her story, not really. Some amongst the Grigori knew parts of it. As Issei likely knew the full story, or had pieced it together. The man was notorious for his in-depth knowledge of everyone under his command. But she had never sat down with someone and just told them before. So she sat there, wondering what was meant to happen next. Wondering if the tightness in her chest would ever really go away. Divided by. Miss Rainier. Divided by. The quiet voice prompted her to begin lifting her head, but then something warm and weighty made itself known around her torso, and her vision was obscured by spun gold. Vaguely, she realized that Asia was hugging her. Divided by. I don't know if I can speak for that girl. Divided by. The healer told her, somewhat choked up, and the fallen realized that the dampness on her cheeks didn't come entirely from her own eyes anymore. Divided by. But to me at least, Miss Rainier, you're a good person. Divided by. The girl pulled back, revealing watery green eyes and a sad smile. Divided by. But I guess ... we're the same, aren't we? Neither of us could just stand and watch ... and now heaven is barred to us. Divided by. Stunned, Rainier looked up at the girl in front of her. Divided by. You ... you knew that the person you healed was a devil. Divided by. Asia nodded, her smile still in place. Divided by. I knew, but I just couldn't leave them hurt. You know. Divided by. The fallen nodded mutely, reaching out one hand to tentatively brush the younger girl's cheek. Divided by. Thank you, Miss Rainier. Divided by. Asia told her, laying her own hand on the one gently wiping away her tears. Divided by. From me and from that little girl. Thank you for being there for us. Divided by. And with that, the millennia-old woman broke down and cried, pulling the little healer to her chest as they both mourned their loss, while at the same time they celebrated the chance to have a new future. From outside the doorway, Issei listened to the sound of the two women's sobs, remaining absolutely silent as he leaned against the wall. Opening his eyes, he looked to the ceiling. Those girls, he started, speaking softly and not to just himself. They'd been through a lot. Scott was quiet, out of some instinctive respect for the emotion running wild but a few meters away. Truly, I think they might well heal one another if we can give them time. Yes, Issei muttered, glancing down at his left hand, which clenched into a fist. And they'll have that time. Even if I have to serve Azazel his own teeth on a silver platter, they'll have that time. I swear it, as the gentleman dragon. I hear your resolution, partner. I'm with you. We dragons may not be the most emotional of beings, but I can respect their resilience. They are worthy of our protection. Then it's agreed, Issei intoned. Come heaven, hell or anything in between, it goes through us first. Indeed. Pushing off the wall, the brunette returned to the kitchen, where the tea should have finished steeping. If they needed more time, he'd just maintain the temperature with a magic circle. A gentleman knows when he is not needed. Compendium. Tenohira no Jiebukai Ryu, the palm of the merciful dragon. A magical artifact created by Issei with Scott's instruction. It turns a certain amount of the wielder's kinetic energy into magical energy just before impact with a target, to ensure a non-lethal strike while reclaiming the expended energy to keep the user fighting longer. The restrictions can be lifted to a certain degree via application of will. Ajusama, a respectful term for a young woman, often one in a position of wealth or power, used often by servants when addressing their employers. Rikai, comprehension. A technique developed using Scott's expertise, Issei's natural aptitude and Ddraig's knowledge of devil magic. It allows the user to understand and be understood by speakers of other languages by projecting the underlying concepts of words in a two-way street. To the users they seem to be speaking one language, but to observers they would appear to be holding a fluent conversation in two different languages. Ryu no Jutsu, Art of the Dragon. A precursor phrase to a branch of Issei's techniques in this fic. Ryu Richai, Dragon's Reach. A technique developed by Issei in conjunction with Ddraig through the medium of Scott's magecraft. Uses Ddraig's spirit as a template to form magical constructs, specifically arms which can interact with the world physically or channel magic to produce interesting effects. Power intensive. Can be used for both utility and combat. When she woke, the first thing Asia Argento thought was that she didn't remember owning a heated blanket. Then her blanket mumbled and pulled her closer, and she realized her error. Glancing around from her haven of arms and other things, the blonde took in her surroundings. The room followed the same color scheme as the rest of Issei's home, though it didn't have the pictures and other knickknacks that were scattered around the ground floor. This was obviously one of the guest rooms, although judging from the outfits she could see in the partly open wardrobe across the room, it was Rainier's. Idly, she tried to recall what had happened the night before. She remembered Rainier's confession. She remembered doing her best to comfort the older woman and get her to forgive herself. And then there had been crying and hugging ... but what had come next? She certainly didn't remember coming upstairs, where she was certain they were currently lying since the window revealed nothing but blue sky. There was a blanket tossed over both of them, and a quick check revealed that she was still wearing the dress she had reached Kuo in, sans boots. So, Issei had carried them upstairs. That was an interesting thought. Asia hadn't thought about the Emperor much after arriving in his home. She had been more focused on Rainier and getting answers. However, now that she had a quiet moment, she ran over what she knew of him. He called himself a gentleman, and it didn't seem to be an idle boast. He acted the part, remaining composed and amiable with her at all times, reassuring her gently when she finally realized they'd walked halfway back to his home and she'd forgotten to ask if he was okay. How could I not be? He had asked her. How could any of them touch me when I was fighting for such a lady as yourself? His tone had been gently chiding, but full of laughter, as if he was well aware how cheesy and somewhat arrogant he sounded, but was saying it despite all that. He was a man who knew his place in the world, and was determined to hold that place, regardless of how that might appear to others. Much like her, she supposed. A man of conviction. She could admire that, and recognize that his nature was selfless, at least regarding women. But she couldn't help but remember how he'd been in the church. The flame which had burned in his eyes while his voice rang like steel. The cracks of displaced air as he threw punches, breaking the sound barrier as if he did it every day. The snaps of breaking bone, the cries of tumbling men. He had been at home in the violence, coldly efficient and precise. He'd been a scalpel in a room of hammers. Even when he launched a man through the ceiling so hard she was sure his neck must have broken, he had moved on without missing a beat. Like it had been nothing at all. Could she really be comfortable around someone who was so well adapted to combat? To someone who could break bones and concuss his fellow man as if it were nothing? She wasn't sure. It seemed there were two sides to Issei Hyoudou, the dragon which rained judgment on his foes, and the gentleman who carried a woman's luggage, made tea, and carefully tucked her in after an emotionally trying afternoon. Which one was real, if either truly was? Divided by you can trust him, you know. Divided by. The sudden interjection of Rainier's voice startled the former nun, and she squeaked as she instinctively tried to jump forward. Arms like steel cable wrapped in foam held her gently in place, preventing her from tumbling off the bed and earning a bruise for her troubles. Divided by H. How did you? Divided by the blonde managed to stutter, flushing red. She wasn't even looking at the woman. Divided by it's the same thing I asked the first time I woke up in his house. Divided by the fallen admitted, quietly reveling in the feeling of cradling the smaller woman. She had missed this feeling of having something to hold and protect. Divided by I tried to understand him, to unravel his mystery so I could decide if I could trust him. Divided by. Rainier's frame, and Asia's by proximity, shifted slightly as the older woman chuckled. Divided by as it happens, he's really quite simple to understand. All you have to remember is that ridiculous title of his, the Gentleman Dragon. Divided by. The blonde's face scrunched up in confusion. Divided by the Gentleman Dragon. Divided by. Rainier hummed in agreement. Divided by yes, that's the one. He wants to be the ultimate gentleman, the epitome of that which all true men strive for, his words, not mine. Divided by another chuckle. Divided by in fact, he seems to think that being the Red Dragon Emperor is more of a means to that end than something to base his life around. He accepts it, right down to his soul, but he's more focused on perfecting his Shinchai no Jutsu than on conquering everything in sight, or proving his strength. Divided by. Asia felt her hair shift as the woman behind her shook her head. Divided by it's absolutely ridiculous, right? A dragon who willingly places others before himself, who is content to wait and let things come to him on his own merit than to reach and take it as he could. Divided by a movement that may have been a shrug. Divided by but that's just who he is. Issei Hyoudou, the Gentleman Dragon. He'll practically be your footstool, right up until someone starts making eyes at you, and then he's making them eat their teeth, their words, and his fist. And all with style, too. Divided by. There was a tone in Rainier's voice that Asia could just barely identify as a mix of amusement and awe. Divided by I guess ... The point of me saying all this is that you should understand. If you choose to stay, he will offer you his protection and his aid 100%, no strings attached, and I don't believe you'll ever have cause to regret it. Divided by she started laughing again, even as Asia felt her unease falling away. Divided by because that's just the kind of man he is. Divided by. The former nun smiled to herself, shuffling back slightly into the embrace of the fallen angel who had saved her life, feeling sleep close and once again. Divided by the Gentleman Dragon. I guess I kind of like the sound of that. Divided by. Behind her, Rainier smiled fondly at a head of golden hair as Asia's breathing started to settle once more. Divided by I hoped you would. Divided by she whispered, before closing her own eyes. Last night had been tiring after all. Idly, she thought she'd need to thank Issei for carrying them up here after they crashed. Comfortable as his couches might be, she certainly didn't want to spend the night on one if she could help it. Around that time, roughly half an hour's walk away, the man in question was traipsing toward the Occult Research Club's room, lunch tucked under one arm. I guess I shouldn't be surprised Rhea-senpai wanted to see me so soon. He mused to himself, glancing sideways at his companion. Kaneko Taoju. He didn't know her at all, really, beyond being aware that was a devil and that she was the school's pinnacle target for lolicons. She, unlike the kendo team or a few other popular figures, had never required some quiet aid from him to ensure her privacy remained intact. People trying to peek on the petite girl generally turned up in the infirmary in various shades of black and blue. If he hadn't known she was a supernatural, Issei might have wondered at the disparity between the size of the target and the scale of the response she could apparently dish out. But when he told Rainier he was well aware of how dangerous women could be, he wasn't kidding. Scott had been emphatic on that point. Women are a blessing on this world, he had confided years before, but not all blessings come from God. There are some extremely dangerous women out there, laddie, though their power might not always be physical or magical. Always remember that just because your opponent is a woman is no reason to bend over backwards and let yourself die. He then talked him through a list of the female opponents the large man had done battle with in his lifetime, as well as their capabilities. By the time he reached Ingrid the Ball Buster, Issei was well and truly inoculated against treating women with anything but the utmost respect, both off and on the battlefield, even if respect had far different meanings in each environment. From observing her on occasion, he understood that Kaneko had an appetite that should have been impossible for someone of her size, weight, and figure, yet which she managed to maintain anyway. In particular, her sweet tooth was the stuff of legends. Apparently the cooking club had an entire book of recipes for her, so high in sugar they would melt an ordinary man's teeth. Since he knew for a fact that the idiom "the way to a man's heart is through his stomach" didn't actually require a Y chromosome to be applicable, he decided that he might as well start forging some kind of rapport with the girl. "Taoju-san?" he questioned, flipping the lid on his lunchbox as the largely monotonous devil turned to look at him. "Would you like my daifuku? I'm not particularly in the mood for sweets today, and I don't want it going to waste." Amber eyes locked onto Issei's gaze, sharp and penetrating as they scanned his features. That confirmed what the brunette had suspected. Kaneko was sharp, in the same way as he and Rainier were. She could read people, probably to a greater degree than either he or the Fallen if D-Drag's guess as to her nature was correct. She rarely slipped in her suppression of her magical signature. But she did slip when she thought she was alone, and if he was close enough at the time, Issei could pick up a whisper of her power. There was what he knew now to be a devil's signature ... but there was something else, too. Undoubtedly supernatural, but not belonging to one of the three factions, he was now sure. That left only one real possibility, and if it panned out, that meant that he was dealing with probably the greatest expert in cold reading this side of Kyoto's red light district. Still, that didn't really worry him. If he had ulterior motives, it may well have, but right now, his goal was try and cheer up the perpetually dour girl beside him. Nothing more and nothing less. If a woman in his presence is less than content, then that means a gentleman isn't performing their role correctly. And Issei took his role very seriously. After a long 3 seconds, Kaneko apparently found, or didn't find, what she was looking for and offered a small nod. Reaching into his now open bento, Issei retrieved the bag of sweets, placing them gently on her upraised palms before resecuring his lunch and putting it back under his arm. As the sound of quiet chewing came from beside him, the brunette hoped he'd just taken the first step on a road to dispel the clouds and shadow that the younger girl wrapped herself in. She did not suit her disposition, and unless she directly stated that she didn't wish for him to do so, it was his self-elected job to try and unearth the real Kaneko from wherever she had been buried. "Thank you," Issei smiled. "You're welcome." "Oh, welcome back, Issei-san." Rias greeted as the brunette walked into the club room, bowing his head in a respectful greeting as he smiled. "Thank you, Rias-senpai. It's good to see you again." A quick glance revealed that the full lineup was here once again, Kiba against the wall, as apparently per usual. Akino on a couch, a teapot and several cups on a tray in front of her. Rias behind her desk, glasses laid to the side of some paperwork. Kaneko glanced back at him, nodded once, and then moved away to what was apparently her claimed seat on the couch across from Akino, quietly working her way through the already part-depleted bag of sweets. Likewise, the redhead returned with a smile, gesturing to a seat which appeared to have been dragged out from somewhere. It was the same as the others in the room, set up to face Rias directly over the table separating Akino and Kaneko. "I apologize that I didn't offer last time, but would you like a seat?" He waved off her apology. "It's nothing to worry about, Rias-senpai. No need to go to trouble on my account." Walking forward, he glanced towards her before seating himself. "My thanks." He settled into the comfortable piece of furniture, and it was Rias' turn to wave off the well-wishing. "Not at all, Issei-san. It's only common courtesy." Inclining his head slightly with a small smile, the Red Dragon Emperor composed himself, right leg folded over his left knee and his hands clasped together, resting on the aligned knees. "Shall I take it, Rias-senpai, that you wish to know the results of yesterday's rescue mission?" The girl nodded, idly thanking her queen as the other teen left a cup of tea on a coaster near her glasses. "My familiar went to the church after we sensed the barrier come down, but I'd prefer to ask you directly than try to piece things together from the aftermath." Nodding once again, Issei smiled at Akino as she placed another cup of tea on the table in front of him. "Thank you very much, Himejima-senpai." The raven-haired girl giggled, holding her now empty tray to her chest. "You are quite welcome, Shinchai-kun." Issei raised an eyebrow, but chuckled even as he wrapped his hands around the cup. "A nickname already, senpai?" I feel honored. Something between a snort and a chuckle came from the wall. You probably shouldn't, Hyoudou-san, Kiba warned him. Akino-san only gives nicknames to people she has taken a personal interest in. The brunette read between the lines easily enough. But a gentleman did not back down from a challenge, particularly a lady's challenge. My oh my, to think I've so quickly come to the attention of my esteemed senpai. He took a sip from his cup, offering Akino herself a beatific smile. Now I am most definitely honored. The smile she returned was almost exactly the same expression he himself wore, a flawless smile that only a perceptive observer would realize served as a mask to any and all feelings beneath it. That cinched it. For Issei, Akino was sharp too. I wonder if perceptiveness is a trait common to all supernaturals, or if I simply find myself surrounded by highly intelligent women. He really hoped it was the latter, though he treated them with the respect they were due as a member of the fairer sex. He generally preferred to stay away from airheads and shallow women. They had too little substance to them. It was sad, but true, and he had to admit it. Women like Akino, Rainier, Riaz, and apparently Kaneko, though, they were most definitely worth the effort. From behind her desk, Riaz coughed politely, drawing Issei's attention away from the raven-haired girl, his smile becoming more genuine as he moved. Ah, please accept my apologies, Riaz-senpai. Hanjima-senpai makes a truly awe-inspiring cup of tea. He punctuated the statement with another sip, and beside him, Akino's smile turned slightly predatory. Kiba met his gaze for a moment, offering a nod which roughly translated to best of luck, while Kaneko's eyes flickered between him and Akino for a moment before the tiniest trace of a smile pulled at her lips. Riaz just shook her head in exasperation, a wry smile on her features. Yes, Akino is very good at what she does. A look of amusement flashed in her eyes. If you can drag yourself away from appreciating her work, could you give me a quick report of what happened yesterday then? Internally, the brunette chuckled. It seemed the Gremory heiress was not above taking a few potshots in good humor. Ah, to be surrounded by such women, all his hard work was paying off at once these past few days. Of course, Riaz-senpai. He placed his cup back on the table, cleared his throat, and launched into his abbreviated explanation. I picked up Asia's magical signature as soon as I exited the barrier surrounding the academy, though I attribute this more to the fact that I was expecting it than to my own skill. A gentleman is always modest. I managed to track her down near the center of town, where I discovered she was lost, and did not speak enough Japanese to get directions to the church. Thankfully, I possess a skill which allowed us to understand one another, and I was able to strike up a rapport and offer to escort her there. En route, we came across a young boy with a damaged knee, which Asia proceeded to heal. Riaz raised an eyebrow, and Issei expanded. As it turns out, her reputation as a miraculous healer is entirely based on fact. She possesses the sacred gear Twilight Healing. Across the room, Kiba let out a long whistle. Twilight Healing. A sacred gear that can heal the wounds and restore the energy of anybody, no matter if they are angel, fallen, devil, human, yokai, or something else entirely. The most powerful healing type sacred gear known to exist. Issei nodded to his explanation. Precisely. At that point, I understood why the Grigori, or whosoever was controlling Rainier's cell from within their ranks, were willing to take such risks in procuring it. Riaz nodded, chewing her lower lip. Possessing such a powerful recovery aid would be an incredible force multiplier for any force. Give it to someone with prodigious reserves, extensive magical experience, and combat ability, and the benefits become exponential. She looking back to Issei. Pardon, Issei-san. Please, continue. Acknowledging the request with a nod, the brunette obliged. From words exchanged afterwards, I came to understand that, despite parting ways with the church, Asia still has her faith. She still prays, and sees her sacred gear as having been given to her by God to do good in His name. There was a dissatisfied grunting from Kiba at that, and Issei noted it for future investigation. When we reached the church, I immediately became aware of a large concentration of bloodlust from within, alongside the presence of multiple fallen angels and a truly disgusting presence I have since determined to have been the stray exorcist freed Selzin. The name caused grimaces to appear on every face. Selzin's reputation had spread beyond the church into the Gregorian devil factions. It was a testament to his skill that he hadn't been killed within months of leaving the church with a rap sheet like his. Asia tried to persuade me to leave her there and proceed no further. By observing her, I believe she understood what she was getting into, but took their offer to continue doing God's work as being worth it. Another unhappy noise from Kiba. The blonde swordsman definitely didn't seem to have any love lost between himself and the church. I made my entrance after having secured Asia and our possessions, then proceeded to engage the force arrayed within. It was, as Rainier told me, a company of 50 stray exorcists alongside Selzin and 3 other fallen. He began ticking off fingers. A combination of D-Drake's aspect of dominion, my own expertise in aura manipulation and close quarters combat served to dispatch the cannon fodder. 1 finger. Selzin engaged me at that time, while the fallen remained at range to bombard me. Once he closed with me, I dispatched him with prejudice. Another finger, and the glimmer of satisfaction in the devil's eyes made Issei well aware that, despite not being the monsters that many tended to claim, these were still people who could appreciate the value of good, old-fashioned vengeance. Finally, I engaged the 3 fallen, who had chosen to remain within the church instead of fleeing. The Onisek suffered extreme concussive trauma to his midsection, causing instant unconsciousness. Kalawarner and Middle both suffered similarly, but the trauma was more widespread, resulting in fewer injuries. A final finger ticked off, and Issei took a sip of tea. At that time, I requested that Asia lodge with me until she has time to decide her next move. She agreed, and spent the evening in Rainer's company before falling asleep. The last I saw of her, she was resting peacefully in one of my guest bedrooms, healthy if exhausted. Report concluded, Issei sat back a bit as Rias tapped her chin, sifting through all the information. Thank you, Issei-san. She told him idly, eyes not really focused on him as she thought. As you have been so forthright, once again, allow me to return the favor. My familiar reported to me once the church was safe for us to enter, and my peerage and I entered to assess the area. Looking down and to the side, Rias appeared to rifle in a drawer before pulling out a sheet of paper, reading from it. We accounted for a total of 50 exorcists, all confirmed as stray by the Vatican, all in need of hospitalization. They were sent to the underworld via transport circle, and will likely be sent to the Vatican for punishment. She turned over the page of what Issei now realized was a multi-page report. We apprehended both Middelt and Kalawarner. Each of them will be returned to the Grigori, most likely for a ransom. Neither of them suffered any major injuries. Issei nodded in satisfaction. It would appear he had judged his actions well. Unfortunately, the devil continued, we couldn't find Onisek, although there was an impact point littered with feathers and blood that was likely his resting place. It would appear he managed to escape, one way or another. The Brunet frowned. That wasn't the best news he could have received. True, the Fallen was absolutely no threat to him, nor could he realistically get past the barriers on his home. However, he represented information. Information on his techniques, his capabilities, and likely whatever data had been gathered on him for the cell's list of notables. The redhead glanced up at him, offering a sympathetic look to show she understood. Turning back to the report, she frowned herself. We didn't manage to find Selzen either, which worries me. We combed the area, but there was no sign of him whatsoever. He's vanished, which is a mystery because when you say dispatched with prejudice, I'm inclined to say he wouldn't have been going anywhere on his own. A raised eyebrow accompanied her question, and Issei shook his head. No, I'm certain I shattered everything solid in the lower half of his face. Breaking through the roof likely concussed him, to say nothing of falling from the height he did. Insane or not, he couldn't have walked away from that landing. As I thought, Rias muttered, rubbing her eyes as she put the report down. I like a mystery as much as the next girl, but I could do without this one. I understand completely, Issei assured her, finishing his tea with a sigh. I can't promise anything, but I will keep an ear to the ground. The odds of you missing something and me finding it are slim, I realize, but I hope you understand you have my support in this matter, Rias-senpai. A genuine smile blessed Rias' face, and she nodded. Thank you, Issei-san. Please, make sure to let Argento-san and Rainier-san know that they are both welcome in our territory, and will enjoy our protection as friends of a friend. She bit her lower lip again. I am right in saying we are friends, aren't I? Grinning widely, Issei stood, offering a bow like he'd done on their first meeting. I would be most pleased to count myself as your friend, Rias-senpai. Rising, he bobbed his head to each of the other people in the room. I hope that, with time, I can say the same for each member of your peerage. Turning, he headed to the door, offering a wave and a smile as he pulled it open. Good afternoon, Rias-senpai, Hanjima-senpai, Kiba-san, Taoju-san. Farewells from Akino. Rias and Kiba followed him out, as well as a barely audible well-wishing from the quiet girl on the couch. He grinned to himself as he walked. Playing the long game truly did pay off, it seemed. As Issei closed the door gently behind him, Rias leaned back in her seat, still smiling although the expression shrank some. At this point, I don't particularly care whether or not he becomes part of the peerage. If we can get him to ally himself with us, then that alone will be a huge mark in our favor. I agree, Rias, Akino told her, talking plainly now that it was only the peerage. Setting aside the prestige of being the one to secure the assistance of the Red Dragon Emperor, just having an ally who conducts themselves as well as he does is a point in your favor. Kiba hummed in agreement. The more time I spend with him, the more I find myself itching to try and match him. Seeing the look on his king's face, he hastened to correct her assumption. Not in combat, but I'll admit that I'm interested in seeing how I would match up, but I'm not willing to risk our relationship with him for my own battle mania. The blonde shook his head. No, I want to match him as a man. The rest of the room, who were all female, gave him odd looks. The swordsman just shrugged. I can't explain it very well, but there are a lot of intricacies and unspoken rules to interactions between guys. Since we're both gentlemen, it's even more complex. Steely gray eyes shifted to the door. The way he holds himself, the way he speaks, even the way he exists. It's an inspiration to someone like me. The three girls in the room shared glances, all of them communicating the exact same thought. Then, when school let out, Issei wandered back home in the afternoon sun, recalling his meeting with Rias and her peerage, going over what he'd learned. Akino is the pragmatic one. She looks at the world in quantities, numbers, advantages and disadvantages. At the same time, it feels like that's another mask. I just can't see what's beneath it yet. Rias tries, but she doesn't have the same cool edge. She cares honestly for her peerage, as individuals rather than as pieces, and while that inspires loyalty it may be a disadvantage in some ways. Kaneko is anomalous at the moment. She's quiet and prefers to observe the world, keeping a shell between it and her real self. She's likely either been trained or has trained herself to act in that fashion. There's a story behind that which I will need to understand if I wish to help her. I thought Kiba was simple enough, a gentleman like me, but it appears I was mistaken. His little outbursts when I mentioned Asia's faith, the way he fingered his sword when I mentioned exorcists. He has a massive axe to grind with the church, and I can't help but worry that it may be too much for him to bear. The Brunet let out a long sigh, while Scott offered another of his emotional pats on the shoulder. Hang in there, lad. They're a complex group of complex individuals, but you'll have time to get to know them. That's making a pretty damn big assumption, Scott, Issei muttered. Donasek and Freed. I have to assume that both escaped, which means information about our abilities has leaked. We have to assume that we've lost the element of surprise, at least to a certain extent. Deirdre grunted. It is unfortunate, yes. But remember, partner, even without me there's likely not a human alive that you can't defeat. When we combine our powers, then anything up to and including one of the domain angels should be within our abilities to conquer. I know that, Issei sighed, but I'm getting a bad feeling, and I can't help but think about all those people you and Scott have mentioned that make those 8-wing angels seem like kids in the sandbox. Neither of his tenants replied. They had indeed shared a great many tales of their more difficult battles, imprinting upon their charge a basic fact of life. There was always someone better than you, no matter how high on the ladder you climbed. That was why being the best at anything was a lifelong dream. You had to chase everyone in front of you, and then outrun everyone behind you. Of course, Issei pushed forward anyway. He was going to be the ultimate gentleman, even if it killed him. Though preferably not before he'd at least got one moment of glorious satisfaction in the face of a job well done. Well, he threw his head back, staring at the sky. I guess it can't be helped. We'll keep up our training, maybe try and include Rainier, Asia, perhaps even Ria-senpai and her peerage. He frowned. Something tells me ... that we're going to need all the allies we can have standing beside us. Oh, in the boosted gear, 2 aged beings shared glances. Both knew the power of instinct, be it that of a warrior or a dragon. Someone like Issei, who was both, was particularly attuned to that strange, massively complex web of cause and effect known to most as causality, the universe, and fate. When he had a bad feeling, they listened. Taking care not to project his voice to Issei, the ginger-haired battle mage folded his arms across his chest, facing a somber dragon that towered over him like a mountain over a molehill. Fit, do you think, Deidrag? He asked, his natural accent coming to the fore. Both he and the dragon hailed from the same isles. After all, even if he dropped it around Issei, for the lad's benefit, he liked to let loose a little now and again. It might be getting close to that time, yes. The mountain of scales and muscle rumbled. He has been synchronizing more and more, drawing upon more and more of my power. He must either move to the next step or halt his progress here, lest he unbalance himself. The ancient Scotsman sighed, running one hand through his scraggly orange locks. Odd a petty might he a few years yet to enjoy himself, afore he had T-Mac his choice. Deidrag let out a sigh of his own, though it was more akin to a hurricane. As did I, however, needs must, as I believe the saying goes. Turning his gaze to the sky, where the view out of Issei's eyes was projected, Scott nodded. That it does, Deidrag. That it does. Oh, I'm home. Issei idly noted that he was using that phrase more in the past few days than he had almost the entire previous year. Sure, he appreciated basically having his own place. And sure, he was happy that his parents were off living the life they wanted to. But now and again, coming home to an empty building grated on him. When 2 female voices called welcome back. As one, he instead felt an uplifting warmth. This was the warmth only a woman could bring, one of the many reasons they were so worth cherishing. Tossing his satchel upstairs as was his habit, Issei wandered through into the living room as he unbuttoned his jacket, finding Asia and Rainier curled up on one of the couches. The former nun had changed out of her dress and instead was clad in a light green sundress, foregoing shoes and socks as she tucked her legs beneath her and scanned the pages of the book in front of her eyes. Beside her, legs extending to the side as she curled them in, Rainier's features were happily locked into a soft smile, the joy practically radiating off her like an aura. If she was beautiful normally, she was almost doubly so like this, even wearing a simple, plain t-shirt and slacks. If it weren't for the differences between them, Issei might well have mistaken the two for sisters. Hello, Issei-san, Asia called, looking up from the book to offer him a smile. How was your day? All the better for seeing you at the end of it, Asia-san. He replied happily, settling into another couch which faced them across a coffee table. Divided by. I take it that Rainier's been helping you learn Japanese, then. Divided by. The blonde nodded happily. Divided by yes, she has. I asked about it, and she was kind enough to offer her help. Divided by she raised the book she had been reading, which Issei now realized was an introductory text to Japanese, written in English. He was fluent in the language, or at least a variant of it, thanks to Scott's tuition. However, he hadn't considered that Asia might know it. I didn't even need Rikai, did I? Divided by. It's difficult, but I think I'm getting the hang of it. Divided by. Issei smiled as Rainier rested one hand on Asia's hand, gently stroking her hair. Divided by. You're coming along nicely, Asia. Don't rush yourself, try to enjoy the learning. You'll find yourself taking things in far more easily if you're enjoying yourself while you work. Divided by got it, Issei. Divided by the girl chirped, raising one fist in determination. Divided by, I'll be fluent before you know it. Divided by, the brunette chuckled, bowing his head. Divided by, I have no doubt about it. Divided by, rising with a groan, he stretched a bit. Divided by, now, if the ladies will excuse me, I need a shower before I start making dinner. Have fun, you two. Divided by, we will. Divided by both called after him, even as he retreated upstairs to grab a change of clothes. He didn't stop smiling. Seeing the two of them together like that was heartening, and it was quite obvious that Rainier had decided to put her oldest skill set to good use, even as Asia accepted it. Consciously or not, he wasn't sure, but the blonde was entirely at ease with sitting beside the fallen, even being in constant contact with her, and indeed seemed to enjoy it. Yes, those two were good for one another. But right now, a good meal would stand them all in good stead, once he'd removed the worst of the day from his skin. Sometimes, he wondered if it would be worth the investment of research, experimentation, and constant power emission to invent some kind of magical antiperspirant. If he was going to be living with 2 women, and interacting daily with a further 3, it just might become a viable idea. He scribbled it down on the sheet of paper hanging over his desk, marked things to do and think about. There were several other loose ideas hanging about on there, some of which were pipe dreams, some of which were basically impossible, and a few of which he was still tinkering with in his spare time. Newest contribution made, he set off down the corridor. Dinner wasn't going to make itself. Elsewhere, 2 bandaged figures lay on cots much like those which could be found in hospitals. One's entire face was swathed in wrappings, his neck held stationary by a brace while his legs were kept elevated by wraps hanging from the ceiling. He was unconscious, and kept that way by sedatives until he was more recovered. The other had a cast on one leg, and bandages wrapped around his midsection beneath a plain white robe, but apart from that, he bore no more signs of injury than bruising or small cuts. He lay on his back, unable to sit up because of the strain on his damaged abdominal muscles, cursing everything from God, to the absent presumed dead Rainier, to the Twilight healing user, to the bastard who had done this to him. Then the door opened, admitting a figure in black armor, its features shrouded by the shadows of its helm, which ran a cursory gaze across the charts at the end of both beds, before focusing its abyssal attentions on the injured fallen. Agent Onosik, you were the acting leader of your cell, which has failed in its mission. You are also the last remaining member, as Selzen was operating under different orders. A menacing pressure began to ooze from the humanoid, and the 2-wing fallen felt a shiver run up his spine. You will make your report, and if he is feeling merciful, Kakabeel-sama may decide to let you live. It leaned in. Donosik gulped. Understood. Our aggressor was the Red Dragon Emperor. Compendium. Shinchai, gentleman. Domain angel, an angel with 8 wings or more, powerful enough to have been given a domain to rule over by God. This can be anything from an element like fire, to a concept like judgment, to a star like Sirius, and basically anything else. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed, just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.